מנוס ואין מפלט, אין לכם פשוט ברירה, אין תקווה ואין מקלט, אין כבר דרך חזרה. זה יום הדין, זה יום הדין, אללה לא עוזר לכם, צהל שוב מכה בכם. זה יום הדין, זה יום הדין, אללה לא עוזר לכם, צהל שוב מכה בכם. ברמה ובמדבר, באמצע יום הכיפורים, באתם בתרועת שופר, אך יצאתם בשברים. זה יום הדין, זה יום הדין, אללה לא עוזר לכם, צהל שוב מכה בכם. זה יום הדין, זה יום הדין, אללה לא עוזר לכם, צהל שוב מכה בכם. זה יום הדין, זה יום הדין, אללה לא עוזר לכם, צהל שוב מכה בכם.
Were you surprised to see Syrian tanks so close to your unit?
Well, no, that was a surprise because they surprised us because we were not ready for the fight, but because it was a holiday for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't make a surprise like they did today.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення великої страни. Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на ордів образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар. Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
guys. The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 630 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And the Russians are panicking. It's a good day.
And the Russians are panicking, Anakin. They do not have a planikin. And it's a huge day today because we have heard that Ukrainian forces are continuing to grow in strength on the southern end of the Dnipro River. And not only that, a Russian counterattack was completely level today around the area of Crimea after trying to push the Ukrainians back across the river. It has been a very big day news-wise in this area, and moving directly into it, starting off, Ukrainian forces near the area of Crimea have been able to secure a very formidable defensive position as they allow more Ukrainian forces to cross the river. This has caused the Russians a great deal of trouble and, of course, a lot of stress for the commanders in this area, as Crimea is well situated to move through the forests into the area of the M14 highway that travels all the way from Kherson to Melitopol, and then through that, the Ukrainians can continue to move behind Nova Khakovka and down the highway towards Aleski, seriously threatening the few Russian defensive positions that exist in this area of the front line. Russian commanders have immediately dispatched a few of the tanks that they have in the entire area to try and deal with the Ukrainian forces at Crimea, and it appears to have evolved into a complete disaster, with most of these tanks being lost and a decent amount of the soldiers that also joined the tanks appearing to go to the wayside. But here's a small clip of the 37th Brigade conducting what we would call in local circles the Lord's work as they knock out Russian soldiers with an FPV drone with Mario music playing in the background. We won't be able to play the music because Nintendo is more scary than the Russian army. But we can see here that the FPV drones are targeting the orcs that we can see right here on film. And here comes the Russian, and here comes the drone. And any second now, we'll see it. And it takes out the entire position. Very successfully, mind you.
The Russian said, "Hey, Mario, is that a missile you got on that turtle?" And I said, "A missile, blya, here you go." Bing.
That's it. Dude, the Ukrainian said, "Man, we be hitting them with that." No. The Ukrainian said, "Fit check," and they looked at the Russians and said, "Oh man, they got that Sagger. Hit him with the freaking FPV." And by the way, just in case if some of y'all are wondering, what the hell is a Sagger? I found this out today because I've been trying to find out the name of this stupid ATGM thing, and I finally found it out today, and this is big news. This thing here is apparently called, by NATO designation, an AT-3 Sagger. I never knew that. I just thought this thing was called the Avdiivka, even by the Western world, but now apparently it's got its own little NATO designation. Anyways, moving on from that, which is completely not even attached to any other part of this news tonight, it's now time for us to move on from this clip and on into our next one, where we also got to see some Russian tanks getting destroyed. These were, of course, a part of the Russian counterattack that was occurring in this area, and it appears that they ended in disaster. Not well at all. And we're going to be muting the Wild West music, but we can see the Russian tanks already having a tough time of it.
Man, tonight's like the minefield of like copyrighted music or something, like the most copyrighted stuff.
Man, they were trying to get us in trouble, man. And Rad Doctor said, can buy that on Gunbroker. You are absolutely right. You can buy deactivated versions of that missile for roughly, I think it's like $350. Pretty cool wall decoration, you know, just saying. But wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? Hold on. While I was talking about that, we can see the crew bailing out of the tank. One guy lays on the side of the road. Another guy gets out of the tank. He jumps off and then falls off. And then we can see the third crew member hopping out of the tank. And he actually just hops off and then they all run away. And now the tank's abandoned and the Ukrainians go through the process of trying to completely destroy it. But nevertheless, gotta say, very nice to see that they were able to knock out the Russian tank and take care of business. If it wasn't for the Ukrainians being able to hold the town of Krenki, we would most likely start to see that the Ukrainian offensive plans in this area moving towards Crimea would start to become fairly difficult. Krenki appears to be a very advantageous position, even compared to places like Kazachi Lahari, which have larger waterways leading to them. Krenki still seems to be the preferred defensive position for Ukrainian forces in this area. Going off of that, I'm most likely assuming that there may be some kind of an effort by Ukrainian forces to create a bridgehead in this area, which is still going to be very tough, because looking at this on Google Maps, we can see that there's just no real solid ground. This entire area in between the Dnipro River and Krenki is marshland, and so it's going to be very difficult to try and move Ukrainian forces through there, but nevertheless, I'm sure that the Ukrainians are not deterred. They will find a way. Moving on from that and into our next bit of news here around the area of Kherson, we also got to see a very rare, accidental, from what we can understand, in-air drone collision in between a Russian drone and a Ukrainian drone. We can hear some music very lightly, which scares me to the core. But we can see the drone, and it goes flying away. And we see the drone still looking around in the fog of the early morning hours.
It was a wee fog out that morning. Nothing too thick, but it was so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Man, call this thing a Five Guys milkshake, because this thing be sick. And we can see the drone right down there. And we can see the accidental quote-unquote collision about to happen.
I was about to say, that doesn't look like a DJI. It's an Autel. I've never heard of that.
I've never heard about that either. Apparently, it's 615,000 rubles.
How much is that? Like $5 or something?
About the price of a $5 footlong, yeah. And we see the drone coming down and hitting, and it looks like both of them got taken out. That's the end of the clip.
The fella took one for the team. Good for him.
That's the end of the clip, but I gotta say, very nice to see that this drone is trying to audition to become a linebacker in the NFL. We're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news and on into the town of Aleski, where we have seen that things have been going on in this area that have not necessarily been to the Russians' advantage. In particular, it does appear that at the moment, Russian forces are being bombarded a pretty decent deal by drone units, artillery, and the like that are keeping them largely at bay, even inside of Aleski. When you see the Russians wandering around in large groups on the street, kind of like some kind of a wild pack of animals, not really that far off from what the Russian army really is, and we can see some cars dropping by every once in a while, and the drone, of course, calling this in for the artillery.
You see that shark with wings in the bottom right?
Shark with wings? Oh, dang, dude.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I see it.
You know how that happened? The shark drank a Red Bull, and that's what happened.
Man, those sharks and Red Bulls, man. Someone needs to get those Red Bulls out of the water, man. It's like plastic straws to turtles. It's not good for them. But we see the Russians wandering on into this little house here. And we can see the first compound being hit by a nice large artillery shell, most likely a 155. And we can see it again. It's an instant replay. And just in case y'all can't tell, I am a little spaced out tonight. I didn't get enough coffee, and I couldn't find enough nitro cold brew, so kind of hanging in here a little rough. But nevertheless,
Man, unless you say that, you can't ever tell it. Like, you sound totally normal. It's just in your head.
dude, to me, I have to wrap myself out because to me, I sound exhausted. Hopefully, y'all can't tell though. I'm hoping y'all couldn't, because then that just makes it sound like I'm just talking like I'm insane or something. But we can see the next building in the compound complex being hit and knocked out. I have to say, it's very nice to see. And it's also showing that the Russian supply bases in the area of Aleski are still being targeted quite heavily and being destroyed as much as possible. Of course, beautiful to see, and it also means that the Russian garrison defending the city of Aleski is going to be in much worse shape as time goes by. They're not going to have enough to work off of like they just did a second ago. But moving on from those clips and just going into a general analysis of what's been going on in this area, it does appear that Ukrainian forces are attempting to continue to move further inland. I don't believe that the Deep State UA map is properly showing what's going on, because from what we understand, the Ukrainians actually control Krinky. On this map, they don't control Krinky, the Russians do. But nevertheless, we believe that the Ukrainians are going to be building up their forces in this area to a much larger degree and trying to move towards the city of Aleski and towards the M14 from Krinky, which will start to collapse the Russian forces in this area and allow Ukrainians a new route towards the Crimean Peninsula, and probably a lot more of an advantageous one, speaking in all honesty. Right now, with the Ukrainian forces trying to advance from the area of Arikhiv towards Tokmak, then into Melitopol, splitting the land bridge in two, and then moving from there towards Crimea, it would be a very tough sail, especially as far as the offensive would go once it reaches the Chandahar Gap area. This is a very small area for an entire armed force to try and pass through, and this chokehold would most likely prove fatal to the Ukrainian forces that would be trying to move in from the area. However, Armyansk is a lot more of a friendly and hospitable attack route for Ukrainian forces to move down. With some actual land to work with, maybe about a mile and a half wide, they would be able to try and push through in less of a choke point than we would see over at the Chandahar Gap. Much more beneficial for the Ukrainians, a lot less beneficial for the Russians, and probably a much more sound defensive plan, at least if they can pull off the river crossings and allow for larger forces like tanks and armored personnel carriers to cross at really a normal rate, much like it would be over a bridge crossing. But moving on from the major news that we've gotten once again from the Kherson River area, it's time for us to move on into Slovakia for just a quick minute. Some of our viewers are actually from Slovakia. One of our biggest viewers is from their next door neighbor, the Czech Republic. The Czech foreign minister actually follows us on Twitter. Gotta put that out. Humble flex, but really cool, and we greatly respect that. But moving on into the town of Bratislava, we did get to see that Slovakia is providing some demining systems to the Ukrainians. Specifically these, which look a lot like Bobcats, and I think they are based off of Bobcats, because it just the similarities are striking. Wouldn't you think, Matthew?
It's like the lawn care version of that, like, robotic bobcat that you stand on the back of it and drive it around. Like, that lays like grass down and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
they've added a little camo or a little camouflage to it.
A little OD green and a little flail on the front of it to take care of the mines. Really cool to know that they're going to be sending these to Ukraine, and hopefully the demining work that these are able to pull off will help to save Ukrainian Ukrainian lives further behind the lines. Moving on from the Slovakia news and on into Ukraine again. It's time to start getting into some of what is called here on the channel, y'all fill in the blank, juice. It's juice. We're about to be moving on into raw juice here in a minute, especially inside of the location unknowns. There's a good amount of it today. And moving on into our first clip, we got to see the first time use of a brand new loitering munition that the Ukrainians have been working on, and we don't have a lot of information about the Ram 2 loitering munition. This is a new attempt by the Ukrainians to create an explosive that'll be able to hang out in the area long enough to catch the enemy at the worst time. And it does appear that in this clip, it was used mostly successfully. So here's the clip. We can hear that they're already putting music over it. We can see the loitering munition hit near the vehicle, or its target. It looks like the first one missed a little bit, but that's fine. There's always a second time. We can see the smoke dissipating off of that explosion. We can see them still looking at the tank. And we can see a second one coming in. Mr. President, there has been a second Ram 2. Why? Why do you
let me keep reading this kid's book, and we'll deal with that later.
there were two cats wandering their way down the road. But with that, that's the end of the clip. Great to see it was published by War Archive, and really neat to see that the Ukrainian drone world is continuing to progress, at least technologically. We know that that's probably helped out a decent amount by the Antonov company, which completely shifted from aircraft production and aircraft spare parts production, which is really what they were doing, into drone development and drone production. And that's something of an interesting rabbit hole, but we will save that for a little bit later on in the stream. Moving on from that and into our next clip, we also finally got to see the elusive D44 gun that the Ukrainians had been using. The D44 gun was introduced into Soviet service in the middle of the height of World War II in 1943. Since then, it's served in many militaries around the world, of course in wars that many of y'all have probably heard about and cared about, like the Iran-Iraq War, among many other fun ones. But it appears that it has made it back to its original homeland in the former Soviet Union inside of the nation of Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are starting to use the D44 gun to try and bombard Russian forces with a little bit of a lighter artillery. It is an 85mm, it's certainly not the biggest gun out there in the field, but it is providing just that extra little oomph that the Ukrainians need to add a little bit of spice to the whole situation. And we can hear the same song, we can see them loading the 85mm shell into the D44. We can see the gun is ready to go, and then they give it a little shoot. Boop! Damn! Dude, for that thing to be
got some kick.
Dude, for that thing to be only an 85mm, that thing kicks like it was 155.
They put those hot rounds into it. I think they overloaded that one.
I think they may have. I think that's what we call here in the States Bubba's hot load. But moving on from that little clip and into the next one, we also got to see that the British Ministry of Defense provided us with a defense update. Many of y'all may also always be wondering, what in the world is a defense update? And well, we got one today, and it's a pretty interesting one. On the 9th of November, 2023, the Kremlin announced that President Putin will hold his traditional combined press conference and public phone-in before the end of the year. In 2022, the event was canceled, probably because Russia had suffered high-profile military setbacks in Ukraine over the preceding weeks, as opposed to this year, where they also had the same thing happen. Kremlin planners will almost certainly see the event as an important waypoint in Putin's anticipated campaign to secure a fifth term in office in March of 2024's presidential elections, because we all know he has to really work hard for that. He is likely to announce his candidacy before the end of 2023. I didn't know. And it's so sad to know that one of his political opponents, you know, the up-and-coming Yevgeny Prigozhin, aka the Nutsack, sadly will never be around to try and run for president because he was unfortunately in a sad plane crash that happened after his private jet took off from Moscow on its way to St. Petersburg. Yevgeny Prigozhin will be gone and forgotten. Most people have completely forgotten that Yevgeny Prigozhin ever existed. And it's kind of weird to think that the presidential elections were coming around and he was already starting to campaign, at least in the border regions around Ukraine. But moving on from that and into the last defense report, on the 10th of November 2023, which was just a few days ago, Putin visited the Southern Military District headquarters in Rostov-on-Don, meeting Chief of General Staff General Valery Gerasimov and the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, aka the Bricklayer. This is Putin's second visit to the headquarters in 4 weeks, likely an uptick in continued efforts to paint himself as the patriotic candidate ahead of the election campaign. So it appears that Putin is using the war to try and position himself for another term as president of the Russian Federation. Now I have to ask, and Matthew, I think it would be good to throw up a poll. Do y'all think that Putin would be able to win another election inside the Russian Federation? I mean, we do have to admit that Russia is known around the world for its election integrity and the honesty of its electors and being able to pick the right presidential candidate for the right job. We all know that Putin has always had a tough time being elected for president. Usually the elections are really close in between him and his opponents. Usually it's about a 6-foot gap in between him and his opponents who are 6 feet under and inside of a grave. But I'm wondering, do y'all think that he might lose this upcoming election? Let us know.
I think the bigger question is he going to get 99% of the vote or 98%?
Or is he going to get 104%? Because Kim Jong-un got 103. Putin's got to do better. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into our next bit, we also got to see a Ukrainian S60 firing from a truck. it was a neat clip, and also one that has a lot of flashing in it, so if you're someone who may be epileptic, you might want to look away from the screen, because it's pretty bright flashes. It might mess with you. It looks like that tree's about to catch on fire right there. Let's look at that again. Dude, the recoil is just punching this tree limb around. Oh, man. Dude, that's certainly going to be having Smokey the Bear rolling in his grave. But anyways, really nice to see that the little S60 was being used. Of course, older system, but still checks out. And hopefully hitting the Russians well, or at least keeping their heads down. Moving on from that, speaking of keeping Russians' heads down, the Ukrainians have been able to take Russians' heads clean off. And in the KRY Report today, that was very evident, very clear. Ooh!
Oh, it's juice again. Man, this is almost identical to yesterday's. Like, all the troop losses are generally the same. Everything, even the Bobcats are just 2.
Well, actually, that are a little bit better. I mean, at least in the armored category, it seems as though they are better. Instead of losing only 7 armored personnel carriers and 8 tanks, today the Russians lost 18 armored personnel carriers and 15 tanks. So in most categories, it's a little similar, but in some, it's actually way better than it was yesterday. And also, the 2 Bobcat skid steers, they lost 2 yesterday, so in that, it is identical. But the Russians have had a pretty tough day in the war in Ukraine over the past 24 hours. 820 Russian soldiers have been wiped out over 24 hours alone. Very nice numbers. We also saw that 18 armored personnel carriers had also been knocked out as well. Always got to say, we love to see those numbers. 47 supply trucks were destroyed, an incredibly high number. 15 tanks were also knocked out, a very good number as well. A whopping, probably record-setting, 58 artillery systems were destroyed over the past 24 hours, along with 26 drones, 2 MLRSs, 1 cruise missile, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and the 2 Bobcat skid steers. Overall, today was a very successful day, at least for the Ukrainians defending their homeland, and they were able to inflict a high amount of losses on Russian forces. With losses like these, we can assume that while there hasn't been a lot of frontline changes, at least through the territory of Ukraine today, the Ukrainians have been able to effect very good defensive positions around the area of Avdiivka and also around the area of Volodar and Kupiansk, which appear to have smaller offensives occurring around them. Based off of this information, we can also assume that Russian forces in these areas are most likely going to have to use the next 24 hours to try and reorganize, or their combat effectiveness is going to be so poor that these kinds of casualties will carry over into tomorrow, and we'll see these huge kind of losses again in the next 24 hours. Either way, the Russians are poised to have a terrible day tomorrow, no doubt about it. And based off of those casualty reports, the Ukrainians are probably going to have a little bit of an easier day defending the front lines within the next 24 hours. But moving on from that casualty report and on into the Ukrainian news, it is time for us to get on into those sweet front lines and all the information that we've been able to gather all the way from the area of Kupiansk and all the way down into the area around Polokhi, and specifically Irkiv. But before we get into that, really quickly, I have to make a bit of a side note because I've seen so many of y'all talking about this in the live chat. A lot of y'all have been talking about the visit by none other than Winnie the Pooh to the United States. Arriving in San Francisco and meeting the President of the United States, it's been touted as a way to try and smooth the relations in between China and the United States. And this kind of takes our attention away from Ukraine just for a quick moment and over into the other side of the world entirely in the area of East Asia, specifically in between China and Taiwan. Today, there was a statement by the premier of the Communist Chinese Party, Xi Jinping, or the premier of China as a whole, stating that they would not be invading Taiwan. Many people have taken this as being insincere, considering that the actual military posture of the People's Republic of China within the area has been incredibly hostile against the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, and we have seen that tensions have continued to rise, to the point that Taiwan's doctrine has started to revolve around nearly a every last man stand kind of a situation on the island of Taiwan. So many of y'all have been talking about it, that while we're not going into the question segment right now, I've seen that a lot of y'all have had hot takes on what's been going on in East Asia, and I'd like to just take a quick moment to talk about this, considering that it's a very large development, at least in the diplomatic sphere in between the United States, China, and also Taiwan. So Matthew, what did that specific poll say?
All right, so the poll on Xi Jinping coming to the U.S., the question was, during his visit to the West, Xi says that he has no plans to attack Taiwan, and what are your thoughts on that? 40% said that sounds like a lie. 35% said we must wait and see. 19% said that sounds likely true, and 5% said unsure. And on that one, Xi saying that he has no plans to attack Taiwan would seem to basically undo everything we've been seeing happening over there near Taiwan that China's been doing. They've obviously been trying to provoke Taiwan into doing something. They've also been trying to take the place over themselves. They've said that out of their own mouth. And now Xi's acting like that's never been a goal of theirs whatsoever, which to me obviously seems like China is lying. That wouldn't be beyond them to lie about it because they do that all the time. They're just like Russia in that regard. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, I don't think we can honestly trust the Chinese with a statement like that. Of course, we always draw a lot of comparisons on this channel with a lot of the questionable leaders of the world to Hitler, but to remind everyone really quickly of something interesting, and I wish I knew if we could play this or not, because of course, we don't want YouTube taking our kneecaps out, but there was actually a clip that was made around 1938 by Hitler where President Roosevelt of the United States asked Hitler that if he got the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, that they would not expand outwards beyond the Sudetenland into areas like Poland, the rest of Czechoslovakia, and so on. And while Hitler laughed at that request and made it out to be a joke, Hitler's actual response was that Germany's ambitions stopped at the Sudetenland and they wouldn't go beyond that. And we all know that was a lie. A few months later, he would end up annexing Czechoslovakia entirely and creating a puppet out of Slovakia, and then also going on to invade Poland just a few months beyond that one event right there. And I have a feeling that the statement by Xi Jinping is nothing more than a smoke and mirror show as far as the East Asia is going. We know that the Chinese policies against Taiwan are incredibly aggressive and have been ever since the inception of Communist China winning the Chinese Civil War in 1949 and the Republic of China, or more so a military dictatorship at the time, and it would later on evolve into being a proper functional democracy like it is today, would live in exile on the island of Taiwan, which is where this entire situation comes from. Since then, Communist China has been incredibly violent and vehement about taking Taiwan and uniting the Chinese people under one banner, the Communist banner. We've also seen that they've had aggressive expansionist policies within the South China Sea, even to the point of harassing Filipino fishing fleets that are trying to exercise control over the territorial waters right off the coast of the Philippines. It's been getting that serious. And so going off of all of that, which has been happening over just the last few months, it is clear to me that there is no way that a statement by the Chinese saying that they have no plans to invade Taiwan could be a true and accurate statement. That is only an official statement to try and throw us off while the Chinese prepare in the background. We also can see that Chinese naval policy, just as a doctrinal side of things, is revolving around massive expansions, at least in their naval projection and power. Is even so large at this point that technically, by just number of ships alone, for the first time in decades, a nation actually has outdone the United States Navy in naval size. That's, of course, just in raw numbers. We're not going over the actual quality of those vessels because 174 of them are motor torpedo boats, which are practically useless in any kind of an actual conventional war, but, still it inflates the numbers, and technically the Chinese Navy is larger than the U.S. Navy now. We have a feeling that a large part of that naval growth is entirely centralized around the idea of trying to take Taiwan. There's not really a lot of ships, like I just mentioned. Most of the ships in the Chinese Navy are coastal vessels that don't have an incredibly long range. It appears that a lot of their naval doctrine revolves around trying to deal with Taiwan alone. And naval doctrine beyond that, even into international waters, may as well be non-existent, at least on the overall Chinese, the People's Liberation Army Navy's doctrinal policies. So going off of that once again, with everything in front of us, I'd have to say that we need to be very skeptical about the Chinese statement that they plan to not invade Taiwan, because to me, that almost seems like a fair certainty, at least within the next few years. But also something that the United States needs to continue focusing on in the background in making sure that if a war was to happen over Taiwan and the island of Taiwan and its commercial shipping was to be threatened, there's a way for the Western world to continue forward with things like superconductors, not superconductors, semiconductors, and things like that created by TSMC, which is the largest producer of semiconductors in the world, and it's inside of Taiwan. If that situation is not fixed over the next few years, if a war was to happen with Taiwan, it could be safe to assume that all computer industries around the world, at least within the Western world, would collapse most likely within months because commercial shipping would not be able to leave the territorial waters of Taiwan without coming under direct attack by the Chinese. Even if the TSMC...
And also,
Go ahead.
And also, by the way, they are fixing the problem right now. They're building a TSMC plant, I believe, in Phoenix, Arizona. They're building a very large plant out there. The problem is, though, they've waited so late. It's going to take so long to build that plant. I think it still has a few years left on it, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. I'm reading here. It says it should be operational by 2024. I'm assuming late 2024. So what are the odds of China invading Taiwan before the end of next year? Probably not good. Probably would be later than that if they did it, to be honest. But I don't know. Enforcer, what do you think about that?
I think it probably would be a little bit later, because I think the Chinese Navy is still trying to build up its force strength. And of course, we're not when I'm talking about this whole entire thing of the People's Liberation Army Navy, we're not really talking about how they could requisition civilian ships. There's a lot of ferries that are used by the Chinese, just in between coast to coast town hopping, that could be used in an invasion of Taiwan. But the likelihood of that happening and no one being able to see that happening for months, that would be highly unlikely. So that's why we don't really consider that in the equation. And also, Walter A. Lakota, the OG Ellison bosun, who is here tonight, is saying that the Chinese Navy is really a paper tiger. And it really is, for the most part. But they are rapidly trying to modernize. And I, of course, laugh at Chinese modernization because it's mostly a joke. But at the same time, it is concerning enough that that a nation out there at all is trying to start to step up to the level of the United States. And at least as far as a war around Taiwan would go, while the Chinese Navy still isn't a toe-to-toe Navy with the U.S. Navy, considering that they would be operating off of the shores of China, and we would be operating from thousands of miles away from the United States, and having to operate out of naval bases in places like South Korea, Japan, Guam, and so on, it does put us at an inherent disadvantage, even if their Navy is worse off on the overall scale. A conventional war with the U.S. Navy having to have a stretched-out supply line over thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean would be pretty tough to fight, and probably a balancing factor, at least as far as the U.S. Navy versus the People's Liberation Army Navy would go. But beyond that, they really are a paper tiger. But still, seen a lot of y'all throwing in some interesting comments. I actually saw someone say Taiwan should be put into NATO. Sadly, gotta say, that would be impossible. Generally, just because of the geographical restrictions of NATO, Taiwan being an Eastern Asian country, it wouldn't be able to join NATO just because it's not a part of the North Atlantic. It could, however, join military alliances like the one that the United States has with Japan and South Korea. I believe we actually have a general alliance that also encompasses New Zealand, Australia, and the Philippines as well. But I don't know the name of that, and I don't really know if that actually exists or not. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But still, I just wanted to take a quick moment before we move back into the Ukraine war news and all the frontline information there to just talk about one of the pressing things that happened today, at least in the international diplomatic sphere with China and the United States. But moving back into Ukraine, like Whiplash, it's time for us to move on into the area of Kupiansk, where we have seen that a small Russian offensive has continued on in this area, and it appears to not be making that much progress. Starting off with our first clip, we got to see a Russian BTR-80 getting outright destroyed. We can hear the chat music already flaring up, and we can see the drone flying on in to take care of business. We can see the Russians hopping off, and we can see the Ukrainians popping off. And poof, and we can see the BTR is now popping.
Like the Russian vodka, bliat.
Man, bubble. It's alcoholism, serious. Liver destroyed. But we can see the BTR burning to a crisp. Very nice to see. Whenever I say that at the end of the clip, like, very nice to see, I feel like a judge on, like, a swimming competition, I'm like, very nice to see, very good form. But moving on from that and into the area around Kuzmivka, we got to see that a Russian S60 was actually hit today around that area. Here's the clip. Oh, we're going to be music that. Also, man, that's the Squid Game music. But we can see the S60 right there. And we're about to see it gone. When you see it, the artillery coming down around it, trying to take it out. And in a second, poof, you see it getting hit, and it's gone. Gone and forgotten. A phrase we love to say on this channel. With that is the end of the clip right there. Wonderful to see that a Russian S60 was destroyed. And really quickly, I'm actually going to be taking that clip and scooting it down to Verkhnyo-Kamyanka, because I was clearly in Verkhnyo-Kamyanka, in the Luhansk Oblast, but almost not. Moving on out of that clip and into the area of Verkhnyo-Kamyanka, funnily enough, we have another clip showing a Ukrainian setting up a decoy tank made out of wood and other kinds of, odd stuff. But here's the clip. Oh. We can see him showing off the decoy and the handiwork of the Ukrainians. And while it doesn't look like much up close, a good distance away on a drone camera, this would look just like a main battle tank. And would become a target, wasting valuable Russian ammunition. That's the end of that clip right there. Of course, absolutely wonderful to see that the Ukrainians are using their ingenuity to try and hide their real tanks in between the decoys. And this is also a big thing that the Ukrainians have been trying to do as the war kept on progressing, is to try and use more and more decoys to waste valuable Russian ammunition on stuff that doesn't even really matter. It's mostly just sheet metal and fabric made to look like a tank. And so when the Russians use their artillery or their guided munitions, the very few that they have been using, against that, they're wasting it on something that isn't real. This is something that the Ukrainians have had to do a lot more than the Russians as well, considering that we do have statistics and information to back up that even now, Russian artillery fire, just by rate of fire, is outnumbering Ukrainian artillery fire by about 2 to 3 to 1 on a daily basis. Given that, it's much more beneficial for the Ukrainians to invest heavily in decoys and other kinds of things like that, so that way a lot of that Russian artillery fire ends up hitting things that just don't exist for the Ukrainians, like a fake tank, or a fake artillery piece, or a fake ammunition warehouse. Doing things like that protects the actual Ukrainian forces on the ground from this overwhelming artillery fire, and makes sure that they will be able to fight another day. Moving on out of that area, near Verkhnyo-Kamyanka, and on into Bakhmut, we did see that over the past 24 hours in Bakhmut, there wasn't really that many frontline changes again. Bakhmut has been a pretty tough battlefield to fight on, at least over the Rasputitsa season. With a lot of the northern and southern flanks becoming nothing more than a slush pit, both sides have found it really tough to conduct any kind of offensives, and so we've seen most of the action in this area starting to devolve into smaller, skirmish-like actions, not really brigade-wide actions or anything like that, mostly just trying to inflict losses on the other side, while not really making any kind of a frontline move. We did get to see that a Russian tank was destroyed, though, in this action today. And we can hear the usual music, the same clips that play all the time. But we can see the Russians getting hit as their vehicles move around in the field. Of course, getting hit by none other than the famous Fighting 93rd. And we can see another one getting smacked right there. And another one. And we can see some Russians hanging out near a BMP. And I guess they peed their pants. Oh, man. Someone's about to ask.
They're like laying right next to like a barbecue grill, basically. And the Ukrainians are about to fire up the charcoal.
Man, that thing's about to go up like Kingsford charcoal, which you can find at your local Lowe's, and it is the holiday season. Better stock up. Moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see Russian forces getting hit again now near the area of Klishkivka. And let's see here. That's a new song.
Oh.
Oh.
That's a little bit of that Chad type tune.
We can see the Russian vehicles moving on along, getting hit as they do. And we can see that one smoking. It looks like a AAPC, some kind of a BMP most likely. And we can see the one behind it also getting hit as well. It's a nice sight to see the Russian vehicles in the area are getting hit. And of course, they are part of the more limited activities that the Russian army are able to do at this time of year. Because of the tough weather conditions and the bad ground conditions, due to the Rasputitsa, these vehicles are largely stuck on the dirt-packed roads or the paved roads, like we were seeing in that clip. And because of that, they easily become targets to be picked off by Ukrainian ATGM crews and Ukrainian artillery, because they're able to pre-dial the coordinates, wait for the vehicles to drive through the area, and then they begin the barrage or hit them with the ATGMs, causing a decent amount of casualties, and once again, heavily limiting Russian activities in this area of the front line. Moving on from that into Avdiivka, we also got to see Russians getting destroyed down here by the 6th Brigade. Oh, apparently that video was a little spicy. I didn't notice that earlier, and the rating didn't pop up yet. It was considered clean back then, but I can't show it to y'all now, sadly. If y'all would like to see it, though, there is a link in the description below to the Middle East map and the Ukraine war map, both from today, baked fresh just for y'all. I hope y'all appreciate that. I put in a lot of effort before every single stream to try and make sure that these maps have proper geolocated clips as best as possible, and of course, you can only find them here on this channel. Moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see a Taurus system getting destroyed. These things are a little costly. The caption says that they're worth around 24 million, which is about the number that we were able to find. It's somewhere in between 20 to 26 million, so 24 million is kind of within the ballpark. So, here's the clip of it being knocked out. Chat music ensues. We can see the bomblets landing on top of the Tor, hitting directly near the battery that's holding the missiles themselves, but we're not seeing any fire coming from that. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but it is very nice to see that they were able to knock out this beautiful little Tor. We love to see Tors getting knocked out. And by the way, have y'all downloaded the latest version of the Tor browser? I'm just kidding. But anyways, moving up from Bakhmut and out of that area, because, you know, there's limited frontline action there, it's now time for us to move on down into Avdiivka. But before we do, I feel like right now is a perfect time to shout out tonight's sponsor of the stream. All of y'all. And to also talk about what y'all have been doing in the polls tonight. A lot of y'all have been voting on the polls. We, of course, love the polls, both the ones in the live stream and also the ones in Poland. They're pretty cool people, and you got a neat little history and a culture going on. But beyond that, a lot of y'all have had some interesting takes on some of the hot topics of the day. And really quickly, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so moving on to our first official question and poll segment. We've already gone over one of our 2 polls that we had up, but we have one more to go. And this one says, today the U.S. Navy shot down a missile fired from Yemen by the Houthis. And what are your thoughts? 69% said it was likely fired toward Israel. 20% said it was probably fired at our ship. 9% said unsure. And 2% said, it was probably nothing. And on this one, it's kind of hard to tell because my first reaction is, you know, we're shooting down the missile. It seems like it might have come in very close proximity to our ship, but it might have just been fired at Israel. It's really hard to tell because we don't have a ton of information on the issue, so we're kind of left to speculation. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say it most likely was not targeting the U.S. ship. It most likely was targeting Israel because we do have a history over the past month and a week of fighting with Israel that the Houthis have fired their missiles close enough to the Red Sea that U.S. ships in the area have been able to intercept and shoot down the missiles before they even make it into Israel. That is something that we have been able to confirm. So going off of that, I would say this is probably a normal missile attack that the Houthis have been conducting for quite a while at this point, and it's just that a U.S. naval ship was able to intercept the missile instead of an Israeli ground battery like the Arrow 2s or the Israeli Air Force. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and that was our last poll to address for now. So we're moving into our super chat questions. You already covered one earlier. Remember? You remember?
Yeah, I remember. But I was like, dang, man, only one poll? I feel so sad. But anyways, let's get on into those top questions of the night.
All right, so our first super chat of the night is going to go to Snow White, who puts in a massive $100 donation. That is the largest super chat of the night. And a huge shout out to you, Snow White, and thank you very much for supporting the channel in such a big way. And Snow White says, it's so nice to have both of you back, and thank you for everything. And please choose a live chat question from my fellow LSA comrade.
And thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Snow White, and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you so much for enjoying having us back. We have been back for a few days now, I think. I think we've been back since Saturday. Yeah, it was Saturday. We've been back since Saturday, and it's been very nice to be back. Of course, The plague was no joke. I think the terrible smell thing is finally going away and bread's starting to smell normal again. Thank God, because I was scared. I love bread, and I was like, man, it would suck that all bread smells like burnt garbage now. So luckily that's starting to go away. But thank you so much for the support, Snow White. You say thank you to everything for us for running the channel, but thank you so much for supporting the channel. I cannot stress enough how important viewer support is to this channel and how it helps us keep this thing running. Of course, we don't run on air, in thoughts and prayers. It's, of course, a business, and this runs directly off of viewer support. And folks like you, Snow White, have made it possible for us to keep this thing running day in and day out. And if it wasn't for y'all's continued support, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. And I can't stress that enough. And so thank you so much, once again, for support, Snow White, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, and I can never say this enough, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And so, we will make sure to choose a live chat question from a fellow LSA comrade. And I actually found one, Matthew. We're taking this one straight out of the live chat where it is right now. Because I saw a question thrown in by a white wolf that said, where are the Houthis getting these missiles? And that is a great question. And that's one that I think needs to be laid out very well, because that has a lot to do with how the Middle East is the way it is right now. Iran is one of the major destabilizing powers in the Middle East at the moment, along with countries like Syria and also, to a small degree, Saudi Arabia, but that's a very small degree compared to the others. Iran is really the only one that's heavily active at this point. Syria is currently tied up with the Syrian civil war and has been for over the past 10 years. Saudi Arabia has toned back a decent amount of their terrorist activities, supporting of terrorist activities over the past few decades, and are kind of more so focusing on world building on an international scale, at least for themselves, or sphere building, at least on a small scale. So Iran is really the only power that's trying to destabilize the region. Iran does this because their version of governance is an Islamic Republic, which is very militant in their ideas, their mindset, and really any country that exists outside of their framework that they consider to be acceptable, they want destroyed. This, of course, includes countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the official Yemeni government, the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, so on. Even the Russians and the Chinese to a point, but they largely turn a blind eye to the cultural and societal differences found within those countries, because those countries support the Iranians economically and militarily. But what the Iranians do in the Middle East, to try and best explain, is that since they hate everyone and they want people to pretty much either be destroyed or be like them, is that they support terrorist groups that largely align with their ideals, or they morph these terrorist groups into having their ideals, or they just create them from the ground up with Iranian ideals. The large part of how Iran is able to do this outside of their borders is through a group called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that group sounds very official. It sounds like it's an Iranian group, and it almost is the Iranian army. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is the group that actually controls Iran's border guards and other groups like that, but they also extend beyond Iran's borders and are the ones that support terrorist groups. Specifically, the big names that you've probably been hearing in the news in Israel, Hezbollah and Hamas. They work directly with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and through the IRGC, they are able to get the weapons and missiles that they're using against Israel right now, or at least the equipment to be able to produce the weapons. And that's the exact same with Yemen. The situation that we're seeing in Israel with Hamas and Hezbollah is an exact mirror image of what's happening in Yemen. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps supports the Yemeni Houthis, which is a terrorist group that operates within Yemen. That's a faction inside of their civil war trying to vie for power of the country. And the Iranians like the Houthis because the Houthis hate the Saudis, and the Iranians hate the Saudis greatly. And those relationships have not been improving lately. They've actually been getting worse. And because of that, we have actually seen that the Iranians will provide, it's just pure raw Iranian weaponry to the Houthis. It's a lot easier to get to them than Hezbollah and Hamas. And the Houthis will use that weaponry not only to fight the other factions in the civil war, but to also attack Saudi Arabia as well. And it's one of the few times that Saudi Arabia has actually had to respond with force of arms to any armed party in the Middle East. They actually directly fight against the Yemeni Houthis with American arms and equipment that was purchased maybe about 10 years ago or so. Apaches, Abrams, things like that. But nevertheless, That's how the Houthis are able to get these weapons, is through Iranian weapon shipments. And then the way they do that, it gets kind of complicated. Sometimes they do it by ship, and it's just illegal contraband being shipped into Yemen. Other times they actually try and have it flown in, like Matthew's famous line, "Did they fly that in?" Sometimes they try to have it flown in, but that's incredibly rare. Other times they just smuggle it over road traffic, 18-wheelers, stuff like that. But through it all, they eventually are able to get all the weapons to all of the terrorist groups in the region. And that's how these people continuously are supplied and equipped. They're not really like other terrorist groups in the past that just kind of had a little bit of training from other people, like the Mujahideen getting training from the CIA, or the Taliban getting training from other groups, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps getting training from the Soviet Union, which did happen, and other groups like that. The groups we're seeing now are a lot more militarized and a lot more weaponized than they were in the past, largely because of Iran's massive efforts and massive amounts of attention focused in that area. So with that, I hope that does answer that live chat as best as I can, White Wolf. Very good question, and I hope that kind of covered all the bases I could. And thank you for the massive amount of support, Snow White, and helping the channel keep on running. I cannot understate how important viewer support is to this channel. And, of course, if y'all enjoy the channel and want to put the boot to everyone who dislikes the channel or, just doesn't want to see us on air, you can, of course, support the channel because it does help us to keep the thing rolling. And so thank you so much once again for support, Snow White. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and yes, huge shout out to Snow White. And our next super chat goes to Mark, the Frumius drone operator. And if you're like me and you don't know what Frumius means, it actually says here that the definition is extremely angry. So he's now an extremely angry drone operator. I guess he could qualify as Ukrainian drone operator. He puts in a $50 donation too. And thank you very much, Mark, for that support as always. And he says, beware the Frumius Bandersnatch. He says, the claws that catch and the jaws that bite. Oh, a flower.
And I thank you so much for the support, Mark. What a loop. And also, thank you so much once again for being here with us tonight and helping the channel to keep on running. And also, very interesting to hear that you're now furious, or frumious more so. I've never heard that word before. That's new to me. I'll be throwing that down in my vocabulary, but nevertheless, thank you once again for the support, Mark. We will beware the Frumius Bandersnatch, and we will be looking out for it because I'm scared. Don't hurt me! But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you so much for being here tonight, Mark, and helping the channel to keep on running, because folks like you make this thing possible. And so with that, we're now moving on into the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving back into the Ukraine war news where we left off, which is around the Avdiivka area.
All right, and the last one of the segment goes to Jason Carpenter, who puts in a $20 donation. And huge shout out to you as well, Jason, for that very generous support. It says, Enforcer Matt, back in better than ever. You're killing it, bro. You're killing it. And question from the chat, please. And thank you very much, Jason, for the kind words as well.
And thank you so much, Jason Carpenter, for the support and the kind words. It means a lot to us, and of course, the support helps us to keep this thing running. And also, thank you for saying we're killing it. Me, honestly, being kind of tired and spaced out tonight. I don't know what it is, but to be honest with y'all, ever since I had the plague, I feel like my energy levels have been a lot lower than they were. It's been kind of tough to get through tonight, but I thank you so much for enjoying the effort and saying that we're killing it. It means a lot because it's been a tough night to get through it. But thank you so much once again, and we will grab a question from the live chat. And I saw another one, Matthew, that was just in the live chat live right now. And this one is from Bible University. He said, you guys may find the Myanmar or the Burman, if Burmese, whatever y'all want to call it, because, well, really quickly to go down that rabbit hole, some people have started to say Myanmar, which is the new name for Burma. Other people just call it Burma. It's kind of up to preference at this point, whichever one you want to use. I still use Burma because I just kind of grew up calling it Burma. So, Myanmar just doesn't really stick in my mind that that's Burma. But, Myanmar, Burma, really the same thing. But he said, you guys may find the Myanmar Civil War interesting. China is silently fighting a proxy war. And that's very true. And it's something that I've wanted to cover a little bit on this channel. But sadly, we have seen that in some instances, attention to outside conflicts, outside the ones that are mainstream, like Ukraine and a little bit of Israel, but that for some reason isn't really as mainstream as people make it out to be, it's really hard to get people to pay attention to those kinds of wars and that kind of news. I would love to cover the Sudanese Civil War, which is still ongoing at the moment, and also the Burman Civil War, the Myanmar Civil War, because it's very interesting. It's been ongoing heavily as well, and there's a lot of video footage that comes out of it that shows us what's going on the ground over there. But sadly, just due to how little people pay attention to it, it would be really hard to cover it and have a lot of people interested in it. One thing I thought was funny, though, Bible University, and this was just crazy to me, is that I saw a video on YouTube where someone said, and this was the title of the video, they said, "Why is nobody talking about the Sudanese Civil War?" And I thought that was just absolutely crazy, because we covered it. And, Matthew, you were here, so I know you are a witness. We tried to cover that literally the first day it happened. Like, as soon as that Civil War broke out, we covered it that day. It was a little confusing because the sides weren't clear who was on whose side at that point with the video footage, but it's actually become a lot more clear as time has gone on. And there's a lot of videos that have come out as well every single day showing what's happening there, and we wanted to cover it. And now people are acting like, because some bigger groups are trying to cover it a little bit here and there, some people are acting like, wow, look, the Sudanese war. I wish people were talking about this earlier. And it's like, people did try, but nobody cared at the time because, the big mainstream companies or the big mainstream YouTube channels weren't covering it yet, or at least even talking about it at all as a topic to make it seem like it's interesting to people. And
I'll be honest with you, like the Sudan war, it's every war is important in its own right, but it doesn't seem like it's as significant as the Ukraine war or the Israel war, because it's kind of in its own little area over there, and it's a nasty war, and you really can't tell what's going on even still to this day. You might be able to tell, but when I look at it, I'm like, who's who here? Like, you don't even know. They're just people fighting in the streets.
1 second. Bless me. But,
damn.
But I would say, kind of to a point, but still at the same time, they are important conflicts. The one in Myanmar is actually pretty important because the Chinese are actually supporting one of the factions in the Civil War, directly with arms, military support, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's a serious one because if the Chinese continue to support these people and they win, Burma is going to flip to being more so from a neutral country to a pro-Chinese country. And, the Chinese will have a lot more influence over them, and will also be cornering the Indians onto the subcontinent alone, which, will become a serious issue in years to come if that is what happens. The war in Sudan also has a little bit of an impact as well, because there's a bit of a quiet fight going on right now with multiple parties involved. The US, Ukraine, Russia, and China are all in Sudan right now in very small form, trying to sway the sides involved. The Chinese are directly involved in this little war in Sudan, because they want to try and pull the Sudanese into the direction of the Chinese to once again add another little crown to the Belt and Road program. And if they succeed with that, China will be another step closer to once again getting a larger handle or control on the Middle East. And so while it seems like a war that's in the periphery, the overall consequences of the war, depending on how it turns out, it could start to change things massively around the world, at least on the geopolitical scale. But that's something that I would like to cover. But sadly, I just don't think we will be able to cover it, at least with the amount of attention that's being put on it and the amount of people who actually care about those wars. I still think they're very interesting, though, because, every conflict is important in its own right and has a decent amount of impact on other areas around the world. But, sadly, I don't think we will be able to. But still, I hope we were able to answer that question, Bible University, well. And thank you so much, Jason Carpenter, once again, for the support and the kind words in helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that you found the answer to that live chat to be up to snuff. And so with that, it's now time for us to move on back into Ukraine, and specifically at Avdiivka. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen that there's been limited frontline movements. Actually a pretty decent one right here by the Russians near Krasnoyarivka, where it does appear that they're once again moving up the railroad berm and towards the area of KRY and Olehsky. It does seem as though beyond that there weren't any major frontline movements throughout the rest of the area, and it does seem as though the Ukrainians are holding the Russians back around the area of Stepove and the Avdiivka coke plant. Moving on into the town itself, we did get some interesting videos showing a Bradley laying down fire at point-blank range on Russian forces that were very close to that railroad berm in the northern part of the city. We can see the Bradley right here, just lighting up a Russian position. We see them absolutely hammering the position.
Man, these watermarks getting out of hand. Look at this one. It's like all over the place.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And also, it seems as though that Bradley may have been knocked out a little bit later in the fighting. But that's the end of the clip, and it is nice to see that the Ukrainians are putting in all efforts possible to be able to try and stop the Russian advance in this area. Moving on from that and into our next clip near Avdiivka, we also get to see some destroyed tanks. Some destroyed Russian tanks in the area. This was posted by none other than United24. A really neat little clip. Oh! Don't. We can see the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the Presidential Brigade hitting these Russian forces and showing them who's boss. And we can see one of the tanks going nuclear.
Something went flying.
And we can see them getting hit very effectively. And also, I just saw someone say, where in the world are some viewers? We asked that question a lot when people just kind of like disappear. Like, we've seen a couple of viewers not around for a few days. We're hoping they're doing okay, and we hope that they come back soon. But we see another Russian tank getting hit. And we see them talking about the brigade harmoniously interacting with the 55th Separate Artillery like an orchestra. When you see the Russian APCs still continuing on, of course, the battle is an unmitigated disaster for the Russians. High casualties ensue in every single instance. When you see more Russian tanks getting destroyed. And oh man, Matthew, someone said, hey man, I just got a message that something was age restricted. I just went and looked at our email. Day 629, which is yesterday's stream, just got age restricted just 5 minutes ago. Man.
For what?
For nothing, it's just because YouTube arbitrarily decided they didn't like a little bit of what we were showing, which is happening a very regular amount these days. A little too regular, but still, thank you for sharing that with me, because that led me to look at my email, which is always nice to see. But with that, nice to see the 2nd Presidential Brigade knocking out Russian forces around Avdiivka, and moving on from that and towards the area of Opitne, we also got to see a very new BMD-4 getting destroyed by the Ukrainians. This is something of a new... You know what? Let me actually show you all a picture of this thing where it isn't a burning inferno, because it is a newer vehicle in the Russian army. And let me go over here. These things have only been in service since 2004, so they are less than 19 years old. But they are supposed to be a new and improved version of the BMD APC used by airborne forces like the Spetsnaz. We can see right here, well, not airborne forces like the Spetsnaz, airborne forces like the VDV. We can see one right here, and what's really interesting about the BMD-4 is that while using an older BMD chassis like all of them do, it has a new turret that houses the 100mm main gun along with a 30mm secondary. It's a fairly interesting system in what is called the Airborne's equivalent of the BMP-3. But we can see that one of these got destroyed around Avdiivka, and it's probably going to be sorely missed, because from what we understand, there's less than 100 of these in the Russian army.
Man, they went and got that fireplace crackling sound off the study videos.
Man, dude, it did not match the end of the video either. Look at this. Dang. And with that...
Like the Charlie Chaplin film, like the crackling film sound effect.
Oh, look at that. That's a banger right there. But anyways, with that, this is the end of the clip. Very nice to see. And I love to hear the wildfire or fireplace ambience. Very nice. Moving on from that and into the next clip near Tenenke, we also got to see some pictures of the soldiers of the 47th Magura. We can see right here, they're wearing the little Israeli Mitznefet helmet cover. These things are very common in Israel. I'm sure many of y'all have seen them in the Israeli war footage, but still really neat. And also, the weapons they have, are very interesting as well. But you can see that this soldier over here appears to have a Canadian-provided C7 with the Canadian optic. And this guy over here, he appears to have an M16A4 with a grenade launcher and an ACOG. All of it has been Cerakoted, which is very cool. But this one over here, I gotta say, something about the front handguard on the C7s, it just throws me off. I don't really like the look of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd looking. It's not exactly aesthetic, I guess you could say.
It's very bulky. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's a very bulky handguard. But still, very neat to see the kind of loadouts that soldiers of the 47th have, and hopefully this will be giving them a little bit of an extra edge over the Russians in the field. But moving on from that, and just behind the lines into the Kyievsky district of Donetsk, we got to see some Russians dodging a bomblet that was being dropped by a Ukrainian drone inside the city. So here's the clip.
The hell? That's a strange bot. Never seen one like that before.
Huh, yeah, that's a weird one. I just saw it. I was like, huh. But we see the Russians trying to dodge the bomblet, or more so the drone, running in zigzags. And there he goes, man. He's scooting. We see the bomblet explode.
Ooh.
It looks like he almost dodged it, I think. Oh. Look at him. He's like, oh, this tree will protect me. It's the first time I've ever seen a Russian become a tree hugger. Usually they're trying to destroy the trees. Now he's embracing the tree as protection. Oh, boo-hoo. But anyways, that's the end of the clip. Interesting to see the Russian dodge the bomblet, and also interesting to see the Ukrainians undertaking some urban operations with their drones. Moving on from the area around Avdiivka and Donetsk, and moving on down near Volodar, we also got to see that some Russian forces have been destroyed today near Vadine, just north of the city. We saw these in pictures only, we didn't really get any videos, but it does look like the Russians did take some decent losses today. Maybe around 4 main battle tanks and 2 armored personnel carriers, a pretty significant amount of armored losses. We don't really know if that's a part of a larger offensive or if that was a probing action by the Russians. If it was a probing action, the losses were unbelievably high. But moving on from that and into the area of Mikilske, we also get to see the 72nd Brigade hitting more Russian forces in this area. And playing the Chad music, of course. You can see the drone looking down into the fields below at the Russian column moving through the town. And you see the Russians are about to get schmacked. Schmacked quite nicely. Very nice. And we can see one burning. We can also see another tank that appears to have been knocked out as well. And another one that's been abandoned. And another, well, that's the same one. Oh!
Oh, just hit it for good measure.
Man, they're wiping these people out. Of course, the Russian losses in this direction appear to be picking up again. It seems as though a Russian offensive may actually be culminating in this area to once again try and take Volodar, but if it's anything like the first one, we're probably just going to see this for weeks on end, and then the Russian offensive will end. It's very difficult to fight in Volodar because the ground is perfectly flat in the area, and Volodar is really the only elevation point due to the larger commie blocks that are within the small village, which I think I can actually show y'all if I can find the town. So there's Volnovaka. Let's see, Volodar is somewhere around here, right here. So you can actually see the shadows that are cast by the commie blocks. They're the only commie blocks in the area. These are low-density villages right over here in the area of Avdiivka and Mikilske, and also even further north of Vadine, there are no high-density commie blocks anywhere. So if you control Volodar, you have a massive vantage point compared to the attacking force, and that's why the Ukrainians will probably be able to hold on to Volodar for a considerably long time. Moving on out of that area and towards the village chain, we also got to see some pictures of a destroyed Russian Mista S in this area. There wasn't really a lot left. Mista S's tend to evaporate once they're hit. You can even see the engine block right there in the middle of the debris. Because they're paper-thin armor, doesn't really allow for a lot of protection, and also the massive amount of ammunition and powder charges that are inside of the SPG lead to pretty impressive explosions like these that really leave nothing behind. But moving on from that little clip in that area, and a little bit further down the lines towards the area of Polohi, we also got to see that a Russian BM-27 Uragan was destroyed by Ukrainian counter-battery fire. The caption is pretty descriptive, but you don't really see that here in the clip. When you see the Uragan burn down to the ground,
Все 200 нахуй. Никто не выжил нахуй. Пидорасы ебучие нахуй. А ебашили, я хуй знает, это какие-то ракеты нахуй. Хуя дыра тут ебать.
we see one of the rocket impacts, which was pretty neat. And with that, that's the end of that clip, but very nice to see another Uragan destroyed. Moving on from that area and into Robotny, we also get to see some YPR 765s moving around in the general frontline area near Robotny. We only got 2 pictures of the YPR 765s back there, and also just driving through the fields, but really need to see these Dutch versions of the M113 in action out there, and hopefully doing well. But moving on from that, and out of the southern front, that is all of the news that we have from that area today. And to really quickly hop into the Middle East, the reason why we didn't even really make a mention about the Middle Eastern news today is that we weren't really able to find much. I was only able to find 2 video clips, one from inside of Gaza, one from outside of Gaza near Ashkelon, and that was it. It appears that the Israeli Defense Forces are a lot less open with video footage and information than the Ukrainian army is. Probably for operational security reasons, which is, justifiable, but sadly it doesn't really leave us with a lot to show and a lot to report on because of that. But moving on into the town of Ashkelon, we did get to see the Iron Dome attempting to intercept more Hamas rockets, which are still being fired from Gaza today, with a few of them sadly landing within the town, but there were no injuries. We can see the streaks of the Iron Dome trying to intercept the rockets over the city. And we can also see one of the Hamas rockets land in the middle of that park right there. Luckily, once again, no injured, but still sad to see that there was, of course, a rocket that landed in the middle of Ashkelon and could have possibly wounded people. Once again, showing that Hamas is going out of its way to really just indiscriminately attack Israeli civilians, of course, leading to this war. But moving on from that and into our only clip inside of Gaza, we got a little bit of footage of the IDF inside of Gaza today. Once again, this was published by the Israeli Defense Forces. We got to see one of them doobies out there. See them running up to a Namer and running past it. See them, of course, just engaged in general fights.
Damn. They let them have it.
Sheva, Arba, Shtaim, Echad, Ish.
We see them demolishing a building. And then the audio cut out, and then we see them demolishing another building and another one. Most likely Hamas weapon sites. And with that, that's the end of the clips. But that was the only bit of footage that we got today from Israeli military activities. From what we understand, the Israelis have been able to gain control of the Al-Shifa hospital area, and it does sound as though they were able to find weapons at the bottom of that hospital, much like they were able to find over the Children's Specialized Hospital here in the area of Sheikh Road 1, or Nazla. Once again, it does appear that Hamas is beginning to use hospitals as bases for military activity, which is once again a violation of the rules of war. It makes the situation a lot more complex and difficult for the Israeli Defense Forces to deal with. But moving on from Gaza and Israel, which that's all the news we were able to get from the entire region today, it is now time for us to move back to Ukraine and into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 630 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the peach.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Непростий був день. Вночі ракетний удар росіян по Селидовому в Донецькій області, просто по житлових будинках, 4 ракети, є загиблі. Ймовірно, є люди під завалами. Увесь день триває розбір завалів. Всім пораненим була надана необхідна допомога. Більше 20 будинків зруйновані. Інший російський удар по Запорізькій області, теж ракетний, серед загиблих хлопці-рятувальники. Вони прибули на місце після першого влучання, почали допомагати і був повторний удар. Мої співчуття усім, чиїх рідних і близьких забрав російський терор. Сьогодні було багато міжнародної комунікації та, звичайно, передусім про те, як дати більше захисту Україні та усім нашим людям від цих нелюдей, від російських ракет, обстрілів. Говорив з головою італійського уряду Джорджіо Мелоні, подякував Італії за принципову і потужну допомогу нашій державі, захисту українських життів. Україна дуже цінує, що Італія поруч із нами у цей час. Цінуємо і особисту енергію Джорджі, пані глави уряду, всю ту активність, якою вона аргументує допомогу нашій державі. Обговорили нашу безпекову співпрацю, пакети підтримки. Обмінялись думками щодо ситуації в Європі та світі. Обговорили і дещо про новий санкційний пакет Євросоюзу. Італія наступного року буде головувати в групі 7. І вже зараз напрацьовуємо відповідні пріоритети, спільні пріоритети. Говорив з президенткою Словаччини Зузаною Чапутовою, подякував за підтримку і справедливу високу оцінку українських успіхів в наближенні до Європейського Союзу у нашому русі до повноправного членства. Дуже важливо, щоб уся наша Європа посилювалась, і від цього виграє кожна держава на континенті, яка поважає спільні правила ЄС. Обговорили підготовку нашої енергетики до зими і, як передбачаємо, до загострення російського терору проти об'єктів енергетики. Звичайно, обговорили економічні питання, які важливі для наших народів. Провів перемовини сьогодні з Джастіном Трюдо, прем'єр-міністром Канади. Оборонна підтримка, посилення нашої ППО, наших мобільних вогневих груп та захисту від російських дронів. Є конкретні домовленості. Подякував Канаді за незмінне лідерство в санкціях проти Росії. Є нова важлива канадська ініціатива «Коаліція партнерів для повернення українських дітей, які були депортовані в Росію». Також обговорили і питання добудови музею Голодомору геноциду. Канада погодилась допомогти з цим в Україні. Я вдячний і Джастіну особисто, і усьому суспільству Канади за таке розуміння України. Провів сьогодні кілька нарад, відзначив нараду з представниками правоохоронного сектору. Зокрема, був керівник Служби безпеки України, доповів щодо протидії колаборантам і щодо захисту українців від тих, хто свідомо розпалює ворожнечу всередині нашої країни. Також нарада з міністром оборони, іншими урядовцями. Усі ключові питання зводяться до забезпечення захисту людей, можливості України проводити наступальні операції і нашої спроможності зміцнювати Україну, вирішувати проблеми, які накопичились. Ми маємо пам'ятати усі в Україні, і особливо ті, хто перестав помічати війну, бо усю свою увагу віддає політиці. Росія ще здатна нести зло. Заплющити очі ні у кого не вийде. Ми маємо боротись. Ми маємо берегти саме нашу оборону головним пріоритетом. І маємо щодня додавати нашій державі більше сили. Слава усім, хто дбає про Україну і українців. Слава Україні!
And Herom Slava. Herom Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 630 of the war. And that is about to begin the second segment of the stream. The fun times, of course, continue into the next segment. And I'm repeating myself a lot tonight because I'm hardly even here. But, Matthew, what do we got?
And I gotta say real quick, I apologize on my end as well because I have to make a confession. The finals coming up, the stress of it are starting to get to me just a little bit, and it's catching up day after day after day, and it's compounding up. and today I'm really feeling it. So excuse me as well for sounding a little bit humdrum tonight. I think I just need a good night's sleep to get back to normal. But anyways, after getting that out of the way, we're moving on to our poll question. It says, is the Sudanese war as important as the Israeli and Ukrainian wars? 67% said no, and 33% said yes. And on this one, I'm not trying to minimize the Sudanese war whatsoever. It is an important war in its own right, but I wouldn't say it's as important as the Israeli or Ukrainian wars just because the others carry a lot of other geopolitical ramifications with them that the Sudanese war does not. Solely for that reason, I would say no. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I think that they are important. Clearly not as important as the Israel war or the Ukraine war, but they are still important. And that's something that I think is a bit of an issue in the modern world, is that a lot of people don't ever see things to be important until it's too late. Like, many people never even knew or never even cared to talk about the Donbass conflicts of 2014 or the annexation of Crimea in 2014, because back then it wasn't important enough. There was a lot bigger things going on, so why even cover that in the news? That's a nothing burger. And then the invasion of Ukraine happened in 2022, and then everyone went, oh, that was important the whole time. It's just that, the public in their all-knowing wisdom just didn't really care at the time to see that it was going to become something bigger later down the road. That's what I feel like the wars in Sudan and Burma are right now. Sure, they're minor countries, a lot more minor than Israel or Ukraine, and sure, their economies aren't that large, and they look like they're in far-flung regions of the world that don't really matter that much in the big picture. But down the road, what happens in Sudan and Burma years from now will become major issues, and people will be talking years later about why didn't anyone cover this in the news years ago when this actually started? Because, I never heard about it, I didn't know about it, I didn't know it was going to be a big deal, why didn't anyone tell me? And that's exactly what people have been saying about Ukraine with the Donbass conflict is, why didn't anyone tell me in 2014 that this really was as big of a deal as it really was going to be? I mean, why didn't they tell me? I feel like the news lied to me, and the news didn't lie to anyone, to be honest. Like, the mainstream news in that moment, Fox, CNN, all of them, they didn't lie. They just saw that nobody cared, and so they just didn't really cover it much. And then, years later, then it started to matter what was happening in 2014. But that's how I view it. I'm not saying that there's an issue with, people considering wars to be unimportant or not, but it's always important to look everywhere around the world, even at things that seem to be a little small. Because give it time, give it some years, and they will become very important issues. I promise you all that. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and that was our last poll to address. So with that, we are moving into our Super Chat questions. No cap. And our first one goes to PETA, who puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, PETA, for the support. And he says, take a question from the chat and keep up the good work. And thank you very much, Peter, for the kind words. We will try to keep up the good work to a much higher standard than we have tonight. But, Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you so much for the support, Peter, and helping this channel to keep on running. We will, of course, take a question from the chat, and I thank you so much for encouraging us to keep up the good work. We try, and I've got to admit, times like these right now are incredibly tough to keep up the work. It's due to the plague. I'm just flat out exhausted already. I've been trying to study as well for these finals coming up. Not as much as Matthew, though. I will admit, Matthew's been studying more than me, but in the amount of time that I've had, I've tried, and to be honest, that started to wear me down a little bit more as well. But thanks to folks like you, Peter, who support this channel and help us to keep this thing running, at least we'll be able to know that we will be able to, keep everything running behind the scenes where we could make this possible every night and keep this thing running and continue the service that we do, getting the news out to all of y'all. And I gotta thank you so much once again for the kind words, Peter, and being one of our British viewers that get up at like the crack of dawn to be able to watch this show, because no other group in the world, except for our European community, has it as tough as y'all have it to watch the show. Y'all have to get up at like 3 and 4 in the morning to be able to watch this thing. And it blows me away that something like, I think it's like 25 to 30% of our audience is from Europe when the stream is live. That means that 1 in every 3 of y'all are up at 3 and 4 in the morning watching the show. And I've got to give y'all huge credit for that. And I thank y'all so much for y'all's dedication and so much for appreciating the channel enough and having a big enough heart to support us, to help us to do this as a job. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. What we got for a live chat, Matthew?
All right, so our live chat question is going to go to Bo Nielsen. He says, a naval invasion on what's essentially an island fortress. What sort of forces are China fielding? Because Taiwan will make D-Day look kinda easy.
And that's true. Taiwan is an island fortress, and it's also going to be very difficult to attack the Taiwanese outright for that reason. That's why I believe, because a lot of people are looking at this two-dimensionally, and I've got to take a moment really quickly to soapbox on this. Once again, the professional, and I say that very sarcastically, military analysts have come out and talked about how the invasion of Taiwan would happen. These people have got to be, and I'd like to try and be polite, but dagnabbit, I'm just, honestly, I'm wearing down on being polite on people on the internet, because so many people, especially these people, are so conceited and act like they know everything, and they come up with such stupid points. Like, the idea that China would just land troops on Taiwan as soon as the war started, within hours. That is the stupidest and most ridiculous premise I've heard from so many military experts out there. That is ridiculous. There is no way in hell that the Chinese, any military, even if they were incompetent, would try and land troops on Taiwan immediately. That's just bizarre. That's insane. Nobody does that. An air war campaign would begin over Taiwan, and a naval blockade would happen, because for the Taiwanese to be possibly invaded by the People's Liberation Army, of course supported by the People's Liberation Army Navy, they would have to heavily deteriorate the combat abilities and the combat effectiveness of the Republic of China's army on the ground, and also the Republic of China Air Force, which means that you would have to conduct a protracted air war campaign and a naval campaign around Taiwan to weaken them enough. This is something that can historically be proven every time anyone goes to war with an island. With Japan, that's very similar to what we did in World War II. We just ended up trying to torpedo all merchant shipping going to Japan and hope that, at least on the strategic side of things, that would weaken them enough that they wouldn't want to go into an actual ground war on the island. And then also we nuked them, which kind of helped out a little bit, but, that's beside the point. But also, on the other side of the world, in World War II, again, just to draw another example, the Germans tried to use U-boat campaigns and also the bombing campaign during the Battle of Britain to try and weaken the Britain's will and just make them capitulate out of the war. The Germans actually had no plan to really invade the United Kingdom. Everyone always talks about Operation Sea Lion, but that's a bunch of bogus. They never really planned on using that, and it was kind of like an ad hoc last resort plan. But still, through every single strategy fighting an island nation, everyone always tries to choke them out before they go to that last resort of trying to invade, because an island is the worst place to ever try and invade. Where does the enemy retreat? Nowhere. They're stuck on the island. You're stuck on the island with them. It makes the fighting brutal, and nobody wants to get involved in that kind of fighting. Hell, even in places like Guadalcanal or Peleliu, for example, much smaller islands that the United States was involved island hopping with, you will see that before they actually conducted those landings on those islands with the Marines, they would always try and either block off the island from supplies for a good while to try and weaken the forces there, or they would either try and just whittle them down through naval bombardments and then land the Marines, but after a while, so that way they could try and weaken these forces down. And it just annoys the hell out of me that these supposed military analysts, and usually they actually have cred, cred that people would believe in the public, like, they're like a former colonel or something like that. And I gotta be honest with y'all, just speaking entirely honestly, people should be commended for military service, but just because someone was in the military doesn't mean they know strategy. And I've seen that that's almost more so true than it is wrong most of the time as a statement. Like a colonel in the nuclear, in a nuclear missile silo, he's not being told how brigade level actions unfold on the field with infantry units. That's nothing that he's concerned about. He's a colonel of a nuclear missile silo. What he does is he overlooks the nuclear missiles, and pretty much makes sure that the silo's operational. It's an entirely different field. He has no need to know about how a massive brigade level fight would happen on a battlefield, because that's not his job. So, it just annoys the hell out of me with the military analysts. But moving back into the actual question about Taiwan, if they invaded, they would most likely bombard the island, try and destroy most of the military facilities, most likely use the People's Liberation Army Navy's ships to try and destroy any commercial shipping heading in and out of Taiwan, to try and starve the island into submission. And then if they didn't give up by that point, then a ground invasion would begin. It would be very tough. It is a fortress island, after all. There's no doubt about that. They would most likely try and land somewhere, however, in the south, near the area of Tainan or Kaohsiung, and then move from there up towards Taipei. Because the area around Taipei is almost completely, unusable as a landing site. There's a massive seawall that spans most of the northern part of the island, which would be a formidable obstacle to try and get up against at all. It would create choke points. It would be terrible. It would be brutal. So that's most likely how the Chinese would deal with the island. And then that doesn't even consider Pinggu County, which they'd have to overcome, which is a little chain of islands down here in the south that anti-ship and anti-air weapons are bristling to the brim on, which gives the Taiwanese a little bit of extra delay time, at least in the south, to get ready for a Chinese ground invasion. But it is a fortress. It would be very tough for them to pull this off. And I don't see them pulling it off easily or quickly, and it's not something that they could just do immediately. They would have to have a lot of preparation that'd be very visible by satellite, such as the buildup or the requisition of civilian ships to try and bring the army across the strait and towards the area of Taiwan. It would also probably see a lot of the Chinese Air Force getting moved into the area, preparing for the air war campaign that would be happening. So it would be tough. It'd be very tough, but, I just have to put that out there again as a thing, in my opinion. And I'm not saying I know everything, because I get things wrong too, but I cannot stand the smugness of people who, did some job, in the military, and it doesn't even have anything to do with actual strategy. I mean, they may as well have been in charge of just logistics alone, which is very important, but it doesn't have anything to do with how a war is actually fought. The amount of people that are involved in fighting a war on an actual level like that, there's thousands of important people involved in that on a given day. Not a single one of them is going to know exactly how it unfolds. And even right now, I'm giving a very big overview. You would have to get logisticians involved. You would have to get naval officers involved, officers from the Army and the Air Force. You would have to get people involved in the civilian world as well to try and figure out how the supply chains will work up until the military takes them over. It's an endless cycle. It's an endless process. It's something that you just can't throw out there, and an invasion of Taiwan would be very tough to pull off, but something that the Chinese could do. So with that, I hope that does answer the live chat fairly well, and thank you so much once again for support, Peter, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, I wouldn't be able to go down massive rabbit holes like that. And so thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat is going to go to Bernard Rubin, who puts in a $20 donation, and thank you very much, Bernard, for that support. He says, as an apology for drinking the Al Jazeera, here's 20. Also, as for the Sudan video you were talking about, yeah, that's probably, let's see. He said probably Factaboy, a.k.a. Simon Whistler, on one of his many channels. I'm not sure who that is. I want to make a disclaimer up front. I'm not sure who that is or what that references.
And I would have to be honest, I don't think I know who that is at the moment. But let me see. Let me pull him up. Let's see here. I don't really know anything about this guy, to be honest, so I'm not going to make a comment on him, but I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, and thank you for apologizing for watching Al Jazeera. They're a pretty ruthless and cutthroat organization behind the scenes, and I've got to thank everyone for the kind words that they're also throwing in about Al Jazeera in the live chat, because Al Jazeera sucks, especially with what they tried to do with us on Sunday while we were running a fundraiser to support people in Ukraine. They're trying to put us down. And so, with that, also, that would be a pretty cool idea to do a Sudan video. I would like to do it, and I might try and do it, but I don't know when, because right now we are, of course, just drowning behind the scenes, trying to keep everything above water, and hopefully we will be able to. But with that, thank you so much once again for support and the kind words as well, Bernard, because folks like you help to make this channel possible. And so, with that, and also, Matthew, I saw someone say something a while ago that you had banned. They said, kind of like how you didn't fight at all. And that's a good point. You're absolutely right. I never fought in the military. What in the world do I know? I'm just some guy. But here's the thing. I don't sit there and go, I was a truck driver, so I can tell you about how an entire corps is going to fight in the field. That's ridiculous. I mean, think about that for a minute. I just want everyone to think about that. Let's say you're a car mechanic. Does that mean that you know how the assembly line at General Motors works? Probably not. I mean, you might be interested in that and might actually know about it. But being a car mechanic at Hyundai doesn't tell you how General Motors assembly line at their car factory works. It's outside of your scope. So, why in the...
Go ahead.
So why in the world would someone, who has, is just a car mechanic at Hyundai, sit there and have the expertise to go, I know how General Mechanics assembly line works just off the bat, without really reading into it or having any experience at all. What I base my analysis off of is history. And I have a feeling that history is a lot better of a basis to work off of than just saying, I did something at some point that was a little associated with fighting in the field or having a grand strategy. So let me tell you about it. I feel like that's a little bit better, at least in my opinion. But what were you about to say, Matthew?
I was about to say, to preface what I'm about to say, first off, if you served in the military, I have huge respect for that, and thank you for your service. But one thing I've always had an issue with is people think the military analysts always get everything right and they can't be wrong. And like that guy that was in the chat got offended because of that statement that the enforcer made. But the catch is, though, look at Israel. How come Israel didn't see it coming from Gaza? There's a blunder right there. Also, look overseas at Ukraine. We had our own military people saying it would only be a 3-day operation or war, and look at what it turned into. It's going to be a years-long war now. The analysts get stuff wrong all the time, and we never really hold them accountable for it until later after the fact, and we find out they've, obviously been wrong. And the military people are not always right. And there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, we can't act like it's a foolproof thing because you're in the military, you automatically know what's going to happen. You can take educated guesses, but that's just about the extent of it.
And just really quickly, and some people are, I see you're maybe taking this the wrong way, saying, well, why are you putting people down? When I went into this, I wasn't into putting anyone down. I really am not now either. But the problem is that while we've been doing this, so many, and there's no other way to describe them, just so many smug assholes want to come out of the blue to us and tell us how things are. We'll be on Twitter, Matthew will be on Twitter putting out his opinion, and then some guy, who was a colonel, in something that has nothing to do with how actual wars are fought, just, a colonel in the nuclear forces or whatever, they want to just say, you're wrong, period. They don't even go, I have to disagree. They don't even give you that liberty. They just go, you're wrong, and I'm right because I was in the military. And then the next day they were proven wrong on that specific thing. And what Matthew said was a correct assessment of the situation. And that just annoys the hell out of me because, none of y'all have had to deal with it, but we've had to deal with it from some of these people. And it's just so annoying how overly confident they are in every single analysis they give and every single statement. And then most of them are wrong. I remember one guy in particular, this was off stream, but they ended up being a guest on the show. I was talking about Abrams, in Ukraine. I was like, oh yeah, it's not that big of a logistical hurdle. They can be in Ukraine, given the proper training to Ukrainian ground force, stuff like that. They said, you're wrong. They'll never be in Ukraine, period. 2 weeks later, the United States made an announcement that we were going to send 30 of them, and now they're in Ukraine. So, it's like, why, and of course, if I was to go into a public arena with this person, like YouTube on an actual video, and I was to say back then, before it happened, Abrams are going to be in Ukraine, and then that person came out and made a video and said, you're wrong, they're not going to be in Ukraine, everyone would just believe that guy instead of us, because, they have a little bit of military experience behind their name, so they can't be wrong. Obviously, the college kid with a history degree has to be wrong. And it just annoys me that that's how it works. Because and it's just so infuriating to see that people will blindly follow an asinine opinion from someone just because they had some military service. I mean, there's nothing wrong with military service. It's great to be in the military and great to serve, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that their opinion is gold. That's really what I'm trying to get to. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And, I think it's just like a nature of the position, like these military analysts or the generals, the people in the higher positions that give their opinions out. Like, mainly, the one I think of is that 3-day estimate of how long the Ukrainian war would take. That was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever heard any of the analysts ever make. And I think they get into like a feedback loop when they get in these positions. They automatically start thinking, I'm an expert on this, I can't be wrong. So then they start leaning too heavily into their confidence, and then they get pretty much everything wrong at that point because they're, feeding back in this echo chamber in their mind, and they end up messing everything up. Not that they get every single thing wrong, but our military analysts have gotten a decent amount of stuff wrong. And it's not necessarily their fault, it's just because they get a little bit too comfortable making concrete conclusions when you really can't.
Well, I mean, like, this might be a hot take, but I don't think they ever really knew how to analyze a war. You know, like, I know that sounds like crazy and everything, but the way people get things wrong, it's unbelievable to me. Like, just, looking at a precedent. I'm not saying that being a reenactor, someone's brought that up, said, oh, you think because you're a reenactor, you know everything. No, I'm not even basing it off of reenacting. I just base all my analysis off of a history degree. Like, reenacting has really no basis at all on how anything works for the most part. It's just great to do and educational for the public. But with how history unfolds, there's only certain ways that things happen. And y'all wouldn't believe how many times we just enter the same situations over and over again on a historical basis, but with more modern technology. And usually the outcome is still the same that it was several hundred years ago, or even just 100 or 200 years ago. And so going off of that, I'll say this is going to happen because this is what happened in the past and this is how it turned out. Or, here's several examples and they turned out different ways and here are their outcomes and that's what's going to happen. And usually it's right. Very few times has it been wrong. But then someone, who has no basis, and that's my thing, they never have a basis to work off of with an opinion. They just go, because I'm, a colonel, and I really have no idea how this works, it's going to happen this way, and it can only happen this way, and everyone else is wrong. And then they're wrong. Like for example, General Milley. General Milley at the beginning of the war, he goes, they will lose in 3 days. That was a statement he actually made on the news in an interview. 3 days passed, they didn't lose. 2 years have nearly gone by, and they haven't lost. How right was he? He wasn't right at all. And then there's that crazy colonel guy out there, another one, who continuously talks about how Ukraine is losing the war with nothing to back it up and no precedent to work off of at all. It's like, where in the world is he coming from? Where in the world are any of these people coming from? And they never give any backup to why their statements are logical or not. I'll sit there and tell you, this is what I think because this is what happened in the past and this is very similar. These people will just go, this is what's going to happen. And you go, well, why? Well, because I think that's how it's going to go. It's like, I don't get that at all. It's like, how in the world do you just come up with a blank statement with no backup and just expect people to go along with it? And people do. It just blows me away how that works. But anyways, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one is going to go to Panama Floyd, who puts in a $20 donation. And also, let me grab this bot real quick. He said Ukraine's losing the war. No, they're not. They're winning. I don't know where you've been, or in delusional land. But anyways, we have a $20 super chat from Panama Floyd, who says, "Oh, I'm late again, and glad to see y'all and the rest of the LSA, though."
And thank you so much for being here tonight, Panama Floyd, and supporting the channel and helping us to keep this thing running. It is folks like you who make the channel possible, and while you are late, it's better late than never. And so thank you so much once again. Glad to see you too, Panama Floyd. We haven't seen you here in a minute, and also thank you for the support as well. And also, hello to the rest of the LSA on Panama Floyd's behalf. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well. And thank you once again for helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And real quick, I want to say one thing. I saw Cole Jack say in the live chat, Enforcer Matt basically means intel and experts are wrong most of the time. I want to make it very clear. I'm not trying to bash the people in the military, nor am I trying to bash the analysts, because in their minds they think they're correct. Now, but they're simply falling victim to a logical fallacy in their mind. It happens when you get in these positions, I guess, because it seems like all of them do it. They get into that echo chamber. But I want to make it very clear, though. I'm not saying they should get everything correct. But, if they would back away from their ego for a minute and look at it from a third-party neutral perspective, they might come to the right conclusion. But I think, humans are humans. I don't think this is really going to change, to be honest with you. It's going to happen, and we have to take that into account when we hear what they're saying and when they give their opinions. But anyways, with that being said, we're moving on to our next super chat, which goes to Steve T, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Steve, for that support as well. He says, fighting and resupply of front lines from drones would save lives and equipment, and drone munitions could fly themselves in for the troops over the river, taking the Crimean Peninsula once resupply is gone, and walk in like Russia did.
And I thank you for the support. And that is an interesting idea, trying to use drones to supply troops in the area. But I feel like it's going to be pretty tough to use the drones, because the drones might not be able to account for the sheer volume of supplies needed, especially for heavier vehicles like tanks that require hundreds of gallons of gas and also some pretty heavy ammunition. it might be very tough to try and spread out the drone supply forces like that. But it's still an idea, and I think it could certainly work for troops working in a periphery area like the marshes of the Dnipro Delta, or maybe even the areas around the Dnipro Gulf or somewhere else like that, where it isn't really possible for Ukrainian supply trucks to make it. That probably would be a great place to use drone supplies like that. And we know that the British are already working on large drones that can do something like that quite easily and even evacuate wounded soldiers. Beyond that, however, I would have to say that most of that seems like a pretty good idea. Just moving forward and kind of hopping your way from Kherson down into the area of Crimea would probably be a pretty good idea. But the problem is with any amphibious operations with the Ukrainian army, it's really tough to pull it off because they don't really have a lot of naval assets to work with, and especially any that can carry a large number of troops or supplies to support any kind of amphibious landing. It's still an idea, though, and if they were able to open up a naval route where some of the ships that they're supposed to be getting can be transported to Ukraine, it may be a lot more possible than we're seeing right now. But still, thank you for the support and your input. I gotta say, that's a pretty good idea. The only thing I think is a little shaky, and that, I could be wrong, is the drone side of things. But if they had enough drones that could carry enough weight, they could probably pull that off as well. It's just that it would be a matter of time and also a matter of money. But still, thank you once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, I want to just issue a clarification on one thing. A news article just came out on Twitter. I saw it, and it's about the Gaza hospital that the Israelis had just gotten to. The headline says, Hamas says that all the AK-47s found in the Gaza hospital were strictly for medicinal use. So I think we got that wrong when we were mentioning that earlier. The source is Babylon B. Enforcer, what say you?
I was about to seriously say, who the hell put out an article like that? And then you said Babylon B. I was like, oh, that's on point. I was about to be like, what the hell? But
I was about to be one of those military analysts we were just talking about.
Dude, I was about to strangle someone, man. I was about to be like, what the hell do you mean? But anyways, wow, that was a good one. I gotta admit, that was a good one. But with that, we're on to the next one.
And the next super chat goes to Butchie777, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Butchie, for that support. And they said, is the Russian military now training their soldiers to become pixelated after a visit from Baba Yaga? Or is it some sort of new digital camouflage? And zoink scoop, we've become pixelated. Oh, bliad, je lief liken. I had a meltdown that last part.
I thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and keeping the channel running. And, yes, I would say that they're most likely trying out a new camouflage called instant pixelation. It happens whenever you get hit by a drone bomblet, and it's supposed to obscure you from view, although I don't think it works too well. But also, like, zoink scoop, I think we become pixelated. Ruh-roh raggy, geschlickt my Leitman in a Deutschen Volke. But still, thank you so much once again for the support, Butchie. Butchie, what the hell, Dutchie? Thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and helping the channel to keep on running. And I hope I was able to address that fairly well. And I like the joke. A very good one. Very nice. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Historic Tasman, who puts in a $14 donation. And huge shout out to you as well, Historic, for that support. I said, for you, ham and pineapple pizza.
Oh, ham and pineapple. What do you think about that, Matthew?
I'll take some ham and pineapple. Do you think Kadyrov wants some? Do you think he wants a piece?
Don, I love ham and cheddar, Don. I love it so much, Don. It may not be a whole lot, Don, but I love the ham and the cheddar, Don.
It's ironic he loves ham so much, considering all the, circumstances.
It's very unfortunate, but you know what they say, Matthew. He's a little porky. But anyways, thank you so much for the ham and pineapple pizza, Historic Tasmanian, and thank you for being one of our Tasmanian viewers that supports this channel and helps us to keep this thing running. And so with that, I hope I addressed that well. Thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Rangers Rule. Thank you very much, Rangers Rule. Great support, great guy. He puts in a $10 donation. Big shout out to Rangers Rule. Great job. Thank you for all the hard work. You're so hardworking, Rangers Rule.
And I thank you so much for the support, Rangers Rule, and helping the channel keep on running. It is folks like you who have made this thing possible. And while you didn't throw in a comment, we are very appreciative and very thankful for folks like you who throw in support to this channel to help this thing be possible. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Fogue, who puts in a $10 donation. And huge shout out to you as well for that support. And we do read off every single super chat on the stream. I saw you ask that question a second ago, and I knew yours was coming up next. So big shout out to you, and thank you very much. And they said thanks to you both. And I've been here since day one, or at least within the first week, but keep quiet, lurking in the dark. Appreciate you both from a Canadian follower.
And I thank you so much for the support, Fogue, and helping the channel to keep on running. And thank you for being here since about the first week. It means a lot to us that old guards have been around for a while, and many folks rarely have supported. We've seen a lot of new supporters showing up lately, and I got to thank every single one of y'all, including you, folk, for helping the channel to keep on running, and thank you for appreciating the channel. It means a lot to us, and I got to say, especially now, because support is a little less than it used to be, and so every single supporter is greatly appreciated because y'all are the only thing that makes this channel possible. And so thank you so much once again, and thank you for being a Canadian member of the Leaf Spring Army, and also thank you for coming out of the lurking and coming to the light. And so with that, we are on to the next one, but thank you so much once again for the support.
Indeed. And the next one goes to AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a $10 donation. And big shout out to AMX10, who's a longtime channel supporter as well for that support. They said the U.S. actually does have a multi-asset, multi-layered nuclear defense system that includes missile defense and also options in the early stages of flight and before flight called missile defeat.
And I think so the support and sharing that with us, missile defeat and defense. Let's see here. What's the best defense against missiles? Let's see here. And let's go to the Department of Defense. It looks like they put something out about this year. And Defense Department over the past year. So 1,000 missiles. North Korea. So it looks like we do have something along those lines. We're also developing more systems along those lines to try and stop and intercept anything coming in. And I gotta say, thank you for sharing that, because I'll have to look into that a little bit more off stream and learn more about it. And I'd like to know that the U.S. does have some kind of a missile defense system outside the Patriot and the THAAD. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to, let's see, Boy, who puts in a $10 donation. And oh boy, thank you very much for the support. They said China started the Ukrainian, Israeli, Sudanese, and Armenian conflicts, all to help enable a Taiwan attack, and sad. And Beijing Winter Olympics agreement with Putin included a $200 billion and an agreement stating both would recognize expanded territory of the others.
And I thank you for the support. And you're right, they did say that at the Olympics, and then China never really followed through on that as quickly as we thought they would. But another thing I would say is that I do not think that China is the master, at least in my opinion, and of course I can be wrong, but I don't think that China is the mastermind behind all of the conflicts happening around the world right now. Russia kind of did their own thing in Ukraine, and when looking at the catalyst for it, it was kind of separate from everything, and more so a European-Russian issue or a Western-Russian issue. China and Taiwan is something kind of on its own as well, more of an issue that's been going on since 1949. The issue going on in Israel is one that's been going on in between Israel and Iran for decades. So I would say that most of them are kind of detached on their own, and they're all just kind of coming around at the same time. And I know a lot of people always like to try and look for things to be not just coincidence, but all tied together in some big thing. But in this instance, it's largely all separate. It's just happening coincidentally all at the same time, at least in my opinion. But still, thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I would say that it is very sad that China is trying to invade Taiwan, because there's not really a lot, at least after China would invade Taiwan, that would add to the Chinese economy, or really any benefit to the Chinese at all, especially considering the TSMC would probably be destroyed in the process. But with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well, and thank you for helping our pizza fund to keep going. We love pizza. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to James Dunn, who puts in a $5 donation, and big shout out to you, James, for that support as well. Hey! We do appreciate it very much. He says, here's to the coffee fund, and do you think Ukraine needs more manpower, or just to try to send them equipment for their troops?
I think they need more equipment for their troops. regardless of what happens, we really don't want to get involved in shipping over manpower, because that means we're directly involved, and then World War III happens. We're trying to avoid World War III as best we can, at least with the Ukraine-Russia situation, and so I would say we probably just need to send them more equipment. Overall, however, we have heard that the Ukrainians may be running into some small manpower issues at the moment. Hopefully not as severe as the Russians are running into, but we don't really have a good scale on what the Ukrainian manpower situation really looks like. But still, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one is a $20 super chat from Fly Eagles Fly, and that voice crack was massive. And thank you very much, Fly Eagles, for that support, and also being a long-time channel viewer as well, and he has been around forever. He says, hey, hey, just because. Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, hey, hey. And thank you so much, Fly Eagles Fly, just because while it may be just because for you, it helps us to keep this thing running. It helps us to be able to keep the lights on and do a whole bunch of other things. Because, hey, regardless of what people say, we gotta pay bills. And so thank you so much once again for the support, helping the channel to keep on running. If it wasn't for folks like you, Fly Eagles Fly, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And also, I hope the Eagles are doing well. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, I see everyone's going to get a nice crack out of that voice crack that I just had just a moment ago. Go ahead, have a laugh. But anyways, our next one goes to CK Bold, who puts in a $5 super chat and says, take a live chat question.
The usual.
And of course we will, CK Bold. But first, Enforcer, what say you?
I've got to say, CK Bold asking for the number one, the usual. And so hit him with
a
it.
Big Mac. And the Big Mac goes to Fighting Finn, who says, do you think Ukraine will be able to get any major gains during the mud season?
I think that if they continue to focus on the Dnipro River area, they might be able to. But in other areas, it's going to be very tough. Like around Rabotne, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, probably not going to see any major advances in those areas. And that's why my eyes are completely focused on this area down here. Because at the moment, there's no heavy armor involved. And so the infantry can take care of most of the business without much support. At least for this time, maybe the next few weeks. And so with that, I thank you so much once again, CK Bull, for sponsoring that live chat, and I hope I was able to address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, I see here that Fly Eagles Fly said the Eagles are 8-1, doing well. So I'm glad to hear it. The Eagles are flying. And also, thank you once again for that support. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from DB, who put in the melting face emoji. I'm not sure why his face is melting off, but it is.
Man, we get out to DB, it's like, oh, thank you so much for the support for the pizza, and now we're moving on to DB, and then you just look at DB's super chat, it's just, my face! And so like, well, thank you so much for the support, but still, thank you.
He's gonna be like that guy. I'm not an animal.
I am not an animal. I am a human. Dude, every
what was that guy? The Ant-Man or something? What was
Elephant Man, Matthew.
Elephant
my
Man.
Lord, the Ant-Man. Oh, oh my Lord.
The Elephant Man. He's the Alabama football man. The Elephant Man.
Oh, no. It's Big Al. Dude, imagine that guy being Big Al. Oh, my Lord. Man, that would be something. But still, thank you so much for the support, DB, and helping this channel keep on running. And thank you for putting in the melting face emoji. An interesting one, but nevertheless greatly appreciated. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well. And you know what we're about to do. We're about to move on to the next one.
All right, and moving on to our next one, we have a $20 super chat from Joseph M. Sika, who's also a longtime channel viewer and legend. And it's good to see you once again, Joseph, and thank you very much for that support. He says, talking about crossing the river north going to Crimea, I heard that the U.S. supplied UK with advanced equipment 50 miles times 20 miles to shut down all Russian drones so they are blind. And I can't remember where I read or watched it, though.
And I thank you for the support, Joseph Sika. And I think I've heard about something like that. It's like the anti-drone gun, but kind of like a jamming system that covers a larger area. I don't know if the area is that big, though. I'm not really sure. I'll have to look into it again to try and find if I can find it. But still, let's see. It would be neat if they had that, especially for their operations south of the river. But I don't really know if they do have it. And that's kind of the issue right now on speculating on anything about it. Because I don't really know if that does exist or not. But let's just say it does. And let's just say they can block all drone activity in this area. That would help them out a pretty good bit. because, you know, obviously stopping Russian drones from operating in the area makes Russian artillery less accurate. It also makes Ukrainian infantry casualties just on the by and by a lot less. It mitigates casualties in every regard and also cuts the Russians out of additional information, which in the overall sense would just be much better for Ukrainian operations in the area at the moment. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support and helping the channel to keep on running, Joseph Msika, and thank you for throwing in some support. It's been a while since you've thrown in a super chat. We are greatly appreciative for it because it helps this channel to keep on running, and thank you for being the Least Spring Army small guy. I'll never forget how big of a fan, Joseph, you were of the small popping up in Ukraine, and then it finally did. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat is going to go to Butchie777, who puts in a $10 donation. And huge shout out to you, Butchie, for that support, and thank you as well for being a longtime channel legend. And Butchie says, for the pizza and Lamborghini fund, and only joking, we know that you guys are all about keeping it real and keeping it 100, and really appreciate what you guys do.
And thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for supporting the pizza and Lamborghini fund. It's one of the funnest funds I've ever heard about so far. A Lamborghini. We would have a long way to go for that, though. And hell, we wouldn't have, even overdoing this for 2 years, we wouldn't have even be able to reach that fund if we just put everything towards a Lamborghini. But still, I do think...
Oh, we might be able to buy one Lamborghini. Oh, I'm telling you. Oh, man.
We're going to be the next Andrew Tate. Oh, no, we're not. No,
if
we're
we just
not.
get the Lamborghini, that'll do it. We'll be set.
I would have to shave my head bald and lose my jawline for that. But still, thank you so much for the Lamborghini fund. And also, thank you for saying that you know what we're about. We're about keeping it real. We try our best to keep it real. And, you know, I'd also try and, you know, cut down on the fun we have considering what we cover. I've got to say, you know, I'm not really one to virtue signal. You know, I find that to be a little stupid, and that's why we've never cared about getting credit for the fundraisers or anything that we run. But I hate watching when people who cover war want to go out and have a fun time on the town and share it with everyone. I just feel like it's so tacky. Like when people go to the bar and they, look, I'm having fun with friends, we're getting plastered. It's like, it just doesn't look good to me. And the best way I can explain it is, when did it ever look good? When there was a war going on and people who are in positions of trust with the public went and did things like partied. I never thought that turned out well. Let me think of examples. I don't know. The czars during World War I who ended up getting killed by the Bolsheviks because they were partying while the whole country was at war. Or I don't know, the French royalty who were also partying while the people of France were starving. Or really anyone in that kind of situation. It always looked so bad. And then people do it on YouTube, and then when you call them out for it, they want to act like that's absolutely atrocious, that you think they shouldn't be looking like they're having a fun time while covering a war. I think it's the stupidest thing. Like, these are the kind of, like, I gotta be honest, a lot of people on YouTube have some of the most jacked up mindsets that I've ever seen. Like, you know, like, they are the kind of people who think that because they're on YouTube, although they're covering a war, they still need to look like they're having fun and shove it in everyone's face. It's like while I joke about the war, I don't want anyone to think that we're having fun doing this, because I mean, like, you know, it's what I've always wanted to do, but it's not the funnest thing in the world. It's not like a gaming channel or anything. This is war, you know? But anyways, thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and thank you for appreciating us, keeping it real, because we try our best. And thank you so much for appreciating what we do. And so with that, and also, in the end, he said James Vasquez. He's not the only one. There's a lot of them out there. A lot of people just decided after, you know, he was outed for that. A lot of people in the war reporting world just decided that they would take that head on and just show it to the public. Like, I have never seen so many people show how much fun they're having while doing a war. And I feel like it's just so much worse when they're in Ukraine and they're doing it as foreigners. Because it's like you're in a country where these people are dying to defend their existence, for that matter, and you're out at a bar having fun. I mean, that, like, no matter how people try and explain that to me or chastise us for that mindset, I don't think that's ever a good look for anyone, anywhere, period, whoever they are. But, you know, it's YouTube, so everyone's got to have fun and, you know, make it look like it's a party. But anyways, with that, thank you once again for the support, Butchie777, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next super chat we have goes to Jenna Myers. She puts in a $20 donation, and sadly, I did not see a comment attached to it. But Jenna, thank you very much for that support and helping to keep us running as well. And Enforcer, what say you?
And so I want to thank you so much for the support, Jenna Myers. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support does mean a lot. And thank you once again for supporting the channel and helping us to keep it running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And I absolutely hate, I've got to be honest, I hate it when people don't throw in the comments because I feel like we don't even give y'all enough time deserving of your support. But I still want you to know that we are wholly appreciative of it because it's the only way we keep this running. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next super chat we have goes to Cliff Wolf, who puts in a $5 donation, and thank you, Cliff, as well. He says, rumor is that Wagner trained Hamas as they did what Wagner did in Syria and Bucha, etc., and what's your take?
And can you reread that one again?
They said, rumor is that Wagner trained Hamas as they did what Wagner did in Syria and Bucha, etc., and what's your take?
My take on that, just my initial opinion would be probably not. I feel like this would be a Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps thing. Now, Wagner having anything to do with Hezbollah seems a little bit more likely because Wagner had operated in Syria before, and also we heard that they may be giving Hezbollah a panzer, and there's a land border connecting them with Lebanon. It would be a lot more tough to do a mass training of any kind with Hamas because most of their actual fighters that would receive that training are in the Gaza Strip. It'd be a little easier for the Iranians to do because they have some very good connections in the Gaza Strip, but a lot more difficult for Wagner because they would kind of just be getting founded there. That would be my take on it, at least. But with that, thank you so much once again for support and asking a really interesting question. That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before. And also, let's see. Damn, man. You just threw up that poll and it like covered my whole live chat. It scared me. But let's see. And also, really quickly to address this, because I saw someone say something that's a good point. David Kendall said, those in war also need a laugh sometimes. Yeah, I'm not against that at all. Like, I think soldiers ought to be living it up. Like, those are the people who should be partying, the people who should be getting a laugh out of everything. You wipe out a Russian squad, bust out laughing at it. Take a break, have a fun time, go to a bar or something. But it's different when you're not a soldier. That's my thing about it. Is that it's one thing for the soldiers to enjoy their time because they're putting their lives on the line and they're the ones actually defending the nation. They're in danger. They deserve to live it up a little bit because they could be dead tomorrow, never living again. But with people who, like on YouTube, who none of us actually are in danger. None of us are, I cover the news, but I'm not going to die tomorrow, if the war turns around and goes sideways. I'm not in any position of danger like that, and no one on YouTube is, except for, people like the Flashback, Starsky, and all of them. So it looks wrong when someone who, just goes over there kind of for the clout of being there, they go and live it up. It just doesn't look right. In everyone who did it, a good amount of the people who did it, they wanted to sit there and blast me for saying that, but it's like, it doesn't look right. It never did. It never has for anyone. Like, when in the world did news reporters go to Vietnam in the Vietnam War and live it up and have a party and make that look like that's what they're supposed to be doing? That's not right. Like, if a soldier does it, it's one thing. If you do it and you're just, someone who's kind of just, like we are, kind of just doing this as a job and just covering the war as a news thing, it does not look good to go over there and party. I bet a lot of y'all would agree. It would sound terrible for news. Well, you know what? Better yet, this is a good example. How good of a look was it when that picture came out of that CNN photo guy who was near the Gaza Strip holding a grenade and looking like he was involved with Hamas? Like, we don't really know if that was true or not, or whether he was there with Hamas wiping out Israeli citizens. But at the same time, that's a terrible look. To even be involved in anything directly like that at all. It makes the journalists look scummy, like they kind of should be, in my opinion. You're there to report. You're not there to have fun. It's a job. But with that, I hope that does address that well and also clarify, I'm not saying that for everyone. I'm just saying that for people who, cover the war. Got to have a little bit more of a serious look. You can't be playing around and act like it's a fun time at sea. But we're on to the next one.
All right, and real quick, let's address the poll that I just put up. Which car would you choose if you had to pick one? I know this poll is kind of left field, but I figured it's time for a fun poll. 31% said Porsche GT3 RS. 25% said BMW M3 E30. I'm kind of shocked by that. 25% said Lamborghini Huracan, and 20% said Ferrari SF90. And for the 24 or 25% that said the E30, I gotta say I'm proud of you. That means you're more about the history behind the car than you are about the money behind the car. Even though E30s are kind of steep these days, they're actually, rivaling some older Lamborghinis now in price, I think, depending on how good the condition is. But also, I understand why a lot of you picked the GT3. That is just a super cool car. That exhaust is insane on that. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say, if I had to pick one, probably would be a GT3. They're pretty neat. They're pretty cool. Lamborghinis are just a little too flashy for me. It seems like the Porsche is a little bit more, refined, at least in my opinion. I would go with a Porsche. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Teslans, who puts in a 5. It says, chipping in.
And thank you, Teslans, for chipping in, because folks like you help to make this channel possible through that chipping in. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Boy once again, who puts in a $5 super chat. And oh boy, thank you once again. They said CCP stole Aussie high-speed ferry design, modified it into a rough landing ship, and now mass-produced and weaponized.
And I thank you for the support. And I have heard about that. I think they have a few of them, like 2 or 3 of them. But they do have plans on making a lot more of them. So that will be true come about a year or 2 time from now. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support and sharing that, because that also shows they have some amphibious landing ideas, and there's not really a lot of people around them that would support a war like that, except for Taiwan. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Joseph M. Siga yet again, who puts in a 2 and says, watch most of your live streams the next day. Heart, 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 heart.
Hey, and thank you so much for watching them the next day. It's still nice to know you're watching them. And I thank you so much for the support and helping the channel to keep on running as well. Heart, 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 heart. And thank you so much, Joseph, for also continuing to be here with us. While you're not on the live stream most of the time, you are still watching, and I greatly appreciate that, and thank you for it. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and that was our last super chat to address. So once again, thank you all very much for the support, and we're moving on to our live chat questions. And up first, we have the Morse code decoders of the stream. We have Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Paul Schultz, Kevin J., and Rumpelstiltskin. And he said, LSAers, tonight's Morse code cipher is, let's get it, the Russians are getting plastered near a river. Call it Crimea River. Long live the LSA.
Yeah. That's the sound of money. And you all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. And the pun is that Crimea River is Crimea River. So I hope that translated.
Crimea River.
And with that, thank you all for deciphering the Morse code message again on the 630th day of the war. Very impressive. Very nice. And thank you so much once again. And with that, we are now on into the live chat questions proper. We're going to answer about 5 of them, if we have 5 of them in the spreadsheet, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream. And so with that, we're on to the first one.
And the first one goes to Mad Machine, who says, I heard the IDF found the command post under the hospital in Gaza today, and do you have any more information about that?
We don't really have a lot more than the official statement, because I didn't see any film come out from it. But it sounds a lot like what happened at the Children's Specialized Hospital near Jabalia, where they found out that it was also being used as a Hamas headquarters. And it sounds as though, just on the outset, just as a general statement, it's a war crime. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Judy Wilson, who says, have you heard the news of a big fire in St. Petersburg? People filmed it, and it showed lots of black smoke.
I haven't heard about one today or recently. There has been a lot of massive fires in St. Petersburg, though. It may be just an industrial fire, maybe something a little bit more serious. But at the moment, sadly, I haven't heard about it. So I'd have to declare ignorance on it. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this third to last one of the night is going to go to Wondering, who says, I was wondering, would y'all put shorter news bits vid for the other interesting global happenings, now for massive views, or they say, excuse me, not for massive views, but because y'all want it covered?
I've thought about it, but the thing is that it's tough to dedicate the time and the resources and the research into it, because like one thing that's made Ukraine and one thing that makes Israel a little bit easier to do is that once you understand and read up and get up to speed, it's a lot easier to go about it on a day-to-day basis because you have a very good track record and roadmap to work off of to talk about what's happening today. But whenever you go into somewhere new like Sudan or Burma, you kind of have to relearn everything, and it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And so for that reason, you kind of wanted to be justified by the amount of exposure it gets. At least mentally, that's how it works for me. I always like to know that people are watching what we're putting out in large numbers, and that makes me feel like what we did was worth our time, because we're actually getting the news out to a lot of people. I don't really know how we could work around that. Maybe, you know, have people... I don't really know. I mean, like I was about to say, have people watch it, but, you know, that's kind of the plan already. So I don't really know how we would manage to do that, especially with the time and effort that would have to be put in. But I would like to do something like that and actually cover news that's more obscure. The problem is that because it's obscure, there's not a lot of people who want to hear about it. But with that, I hope that does address that at least the best I can. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
All right, and this one's going to go to Teslands, who says, how much percentage has Russian military equipment declined compared to what they had at the start, and what is the best estimate?
From what we understand, Russian military equipment numbers in areas such as the tanks have decreased nearly 70% at this point in the war. They are, of course, trying to bring new tanks in, and from what we understand, the Russians are able to bring in about 20 new tanks a month right now, 20 to 30, you know, and that's all variants. But from what I know, it's usually pretty high losses in the percentage categories, but the tanks, the APC, stuff like that are the highest. But sadly, I can't really give you a breakdown on everything because there's a lot of different categories and each one has a different statistic behind it. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person to turn in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Anthony Johnson, who says, how long can the Israel-Hamas war be expected to end so that the USA can get past this Iran and Russia distraction and concentrate on the Russia-Ukraine war?
That's a tough one. We don't know when this will end. Conflicts like this in between Hamas and Israel can take a long time. This could end up being years, you know, with an Israeli occupation just endlessly dragging on inside the Gaza Strip. We don't really know, to be quite honest. So with that, it's a little too tough for me to answer. It would be crystal balling way too much, and whatever answer I give, it has a 99.9% chance of being wrong. So the best I can tell you is that it will go on for months. That is a guarantee. It may even go on for years. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and it is the end of tonight's stream. I thank all of y'all so much once again for watching. So many of y'all have come on tonight to watch tonight's stream. 5.2 thousand of y'all at the peak, 24,000 of y'all before the stream rounded out. We are, of course, honored to have every single one of y'all here, all 24,000 of y'all from start to finish. If y'all did enjoy and you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. We run this channel 6 days a week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East, and we will be trying to get back to making videos. It's very, I always say that, but it's very tough to, because law school usually eats up all the time in the middle of the day when the videos would come out. But still, thank you all so much once again for watching. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe. Slava Ukraini, God bless Israel, God bless America, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night, folks. Thank you all for another great stream once again. We'll see you all tomorrow. And of course, Slava Ukraine, Slava Israel, and yes, good night.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.